Chapter 260. The atmosphere in the hall instantly dropped to a freezing point. Mickey's eyes followed Gloria as she ran out of the hall. His legs wobbled, and he wanted to get up as well, but the noblewoman beside him reached out and held him down. She shook her head with a hint of warning, and aside from concern, there was also a hint of relief on her face. Everyone wore different expressions, but most of them were gloating over Geoffrey's misfortune. They were thinking about what kind of punishment he would give Gloria and Lance's family in a fit of rage. Geoffrey also couldn't hide the surprise in his eyes. His gaze lingered on Gloria's empty seat for a while, but surprisingly, he didn't seem to be too angry. Instead, he used his knife to cut into his steak slowly as he said, "Let's eat." "Father, Gloria, Aurora said hesitantly, "I would feel more comfortable if you could wear a veil to cover your hideous face instead of relying on a pile of messy powder to paint the wall. If I find out that you've consumed the dark magician's hallucination potion again, your pocket money will be reduced to 0 and you'll be chased out of the house." Geoffrey's voice was a little cold. There were still traces of blood on the medium-rare steak, but it was easily chewed in his mouth. His deep eyes seemed to have seen through everything. Yes. Aurora lowered her head, and didn't dare to say anything else. What can a woman do? Only an old fool like Ian would let a woman take charge of the family. Geoffrey thought to himself as he ate. However, this was the first time that Gloria had objected to his words, right? It was just like when Lance had first questioned his words. The father and daughter were quite similar when they were serious. If the freckles on my face are healed, what can I do? In the garden of the Morton Manor, Gloria squatted beside a small pond, and looked at the fish swimming in the pond as she softly murmured to herself. "Why is Mr. Mac here?" Luna was standing not far away, looking at Meg's back in the hallway with a hint of confusion in her heart. She took a few steps forward, and was greeted by the sight of a row of children eating happily. Their faces were brimming with joy and vitality. Could it be that Mr. Mac brought delicious food for them? Luna's eyes immediately lit up. She looked at Amy, who was standing off to the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and immediately figured out that Amy must have brought Meg here. As for Mag, they didn't expect him to come. Every serving of Mammy Restaurant's food was so expensive. If Mag was using the restaurant's food to entertain the children, then he was being too generous. "Teacher Luna." Amy turned around just in time to see Luna, and she immediately waved happily at her. "Hello, Teacher Luna." The children all stood up upon hearing this, and all greeted Luna happily. Even the delicious food couldn't slow them down in the slightest. "Young Mistress Luna." Meg turned around with a hint of surprise. He looked at Luna, who was carrying a cloth bag, and the children's reactions, and immediately understood why Luna had come here. In the past 3 years, Luna had provided Amy with a lot of help and warmth. To Amy, she was the only one, and to Luna, it was probably the same to all of the children. "Hello, children." Luna waved at the children with a wide smile on her face. She quickly strode over to Meg, and nodded with a smile. "Hello, Mr. Meg. Are you here to see the children?" Meg asked with a smile as he looked at Luna. Luna was wearing a dark green floral dress today, and the silk scarf embroidered with golden lilies was still tied around her neck. When she was in front of the children, her smile was very amiable, and it made people feel very warm. "Yes, but it looks like I'm not needed today. Mr. Meg has brought some delicious food for the children." Luna nodded, and took a deep breath. She looked at the braised chicken in the box, and her eyes lit up. What an enticing aroma, but this seems to be different from the dishes that the restaurant has served before. Could it be that Mr. Meg has released a new dish? Yes, this is the restaurant's new dish, but it hasn't been officially released yet. If Teacher Luna hasn't had dinner yet, perhaps you can have dinner with the children. Meg nodded, and took out a braised chicken and rice from the bag. "I just made 2 extra servings." "No, I've already eaten." "Little Colin isn't back yet, is he? I'll go see where he is first." Luna waved her hand, and swept her gaze over the children. She put down the cloth bag in her hand, and was about to walk out. "Teacher Luna, you don't have to look for him. Colin said that someone wants to take him home to be his son. The adults of the Grey Temple have already taken care of the paperwork for him. He won't have to beg anymore, and can eat delicious white rice every day, a child said with a hint of envy in his voice. How can white rice compare to the chicken made by Remi's father? This is the first time I've eaten chicken. After eating it, my body feels warm and comfortable. The child next to her giggled and said with a very happy expression. I see. That's great. Luna stopped in her tracks when she heard that, and a smile appeared on her face. The best home for these children was the Grey Temple, which could find suitable adopters for them. However, generally, those who had the needs and conditions to adopt children were more inclined to adopt children who were born not long ago, and not these children who were used to being wild outside, even though they were still cute and kind children in her eyes. Teacher Luna, just have one serving. Every time you bring food to us, you eat with us. You definitely haven't eaten this time. Father's braised chicken is really delicious, Amy said expectantly as she looked up at Luna. Yes, Teacher Luna. It's so delicious that I'm crying, Jessica said with a nod, the tears on her face still wet. The other children also chimed in, and begged Luna to have one serving. They had to let Teacher Luna eat such delicious food. It would be a pity to miss it. Have one serving. It won't taste good if it gets cold. The children all want you to eat it, Meg said with a smile as he handed over the braised chicken and rice in his hand. Luna looked at the children's innocent and expectant eyes, and then at Meg's kind smile. She hesitated for a moment, and then reached out to take the 2 boxes. She nodded with a smile, and said, Okay, then I'll eat with you all today. Be good and eat until you're full. Yay. The children's faces lit up with happy smiles, and they obediently returned to their seats. Chapter 261. The tempting aroma made Luna swallow her saliva. Looking at the children who were completely immersed in the delicious food, she also picked up her chopsticks and took a bite of the chicken. What a thick and delicious chicken soup. The chicken is so tender and smooth. It's so delicious. Luna's eyes suddenly lit up. The delicious taste spread in her mouth. She could taste the meat of the turkey. But how did the chicken soup improve the taste to such an extreme? It also contained a tempting fresh aroma. It was a taste she had never tasted before. This is. After eating a piece of chicken, Luna picked up a piece of shiitake mushroom. The rich aroma came to her nose. Unlike ordinary mushrooms, whose aroma was reserved, this kind of aroma seemed to want to let everyone know. It didn't hide it at all. Maybe the secret to improving the taste of the chicken soup is here. Luna put the shiitake mushroom into her mouth expectantly. She took a gentle bite, and the chicken soup overflowed from the succulent shiitake mushroom. Although it was dry, the texture was not stiff at all. It was still fresh and smooth. The rich mushroom aroma wreaked havoc in the mouth. After swallowing, there was still a lingering fragrance in the mouth. It was a taste that made people reluctant to part with and intoxicated. It's really delicious. Mr. Meg, your cooking skills are really amazing, Luna couldn't help but praise. If the Yeongju fried rice made by Meg had surprised her the first time, then the rujiamo, tofu pudding, and now the braised chicken and rice, Meg had been breaking his own mind. Every dish brought an extraordinary enjoyment to people. Such talent could only be described as genius. Miss Luna, you're too kind. Mag smiled. Being complimented by a beautiful lady was naturally something that made him happy. The dinner ended with the children's laughter. Every box was eaten clean, not even a drop of chicken soup was left. Only a 7-year-old child in the corner had half of the chicken soup left. He carefully closed the box, looked at Meg, and asked, Uncle, can I borrow this box for one night? My sister hasn't eaten yet, so I want to bring this delicacy home for her to try. Of course you can. This box can only be used once. You can throw it away after you use it. You don't have to return it to me. Mag nodded with a smile. He took out one of the remaining 2 servings of braised chicken and rice and placed it in the other bag before handing it to the child as he said, Also, take this braised chicken and rice with you to eat with your little sister. Half a serving won't be enough. Throw it away. Uncle, can I keep it? I've never had such a good bowl before. Jessica looked at the smooth and soft transparent bowl in her hand and asked Meg with anticipation. I want to keep it for dinner too. My bowl cracked again yesterday and can't hold water anymore. This bowl is really great. The other children also chimed in as they hugged the takeout boxes in their hands as if they were holding a treasure. Meg's heart suddenly tightened upon seeing this. These disposable plastic takeout bowls and boxes were like treasures in the eyes of these children. Poverty had made them experience the hardships of life at an early age, and they were struggling to survive in this world with their frail bodies. All right, then you can all keep it. Meg forced a smile onto his face as he nodded. Yay. Thank you, Uncle. The children immediately cheered as they raised the boxes in their hands above their heads as if they had received an incredible reward. It's getting dark. Goodbye, Teacher Luna, Uncle, and Amy. I have to go home now. A child hugged a bowl in his arms as he bade farewell and ran away. All the other children also bade farewell. Children, be careful on the road. Take the main road with a lot of people. Luna hurriedly reminded them as she watched the children disperse in all directions. Amy, I have to go home too. My mother is still waiting for me at home. Your dress today is so beautiful, and Ugly Duckling is super cute. I hope I can play with you again next time. Jessica hugged the takeout box in her hands as she looked at Amy with an adorable smile on her face. She patted Ugly Duckling's head with anticipation and reluctance in her eyes. Jessica, is your mother still coughing every day? Are her eyes all right? REMI looked at Jessica with some reluctance and asked with concern. Yes, it seems to have worsened in the autumn. Jessica nodded with a dejected expression, but a smile quickly appeared on her face as she said, but Mother said that she'll be fine in the winter. Once her eyes recover, she'll be able to sew things for other people again. That way, I can stay at home in the winter, and it'll be a little warmer at home. Are you sick? Meg looked at Jessica's slightly dirty clothes and the intricate stitches that had been sewn together. It turned out that her mother was quite adept at sewing, but if she couldn't get out of bed now, it would be very difficult for her to survive the winter. Meg couldn't help but furrow his brows at the sight of the adorable smile on Jessica's face. Jessica's current situation was most likely similar to Amy's, but if her mother really didn't survive the next winter, then no one would be able to continue to take care of her in her place. Yes, she'll definitely get better. REMI patted Jessica's shoulder like a little adult. She touched her pocket and took her little fist out of her pocket and put it behind her back. She looked at Jessica mysteriously and said, Jessica, I want to give you a present. Guess what it is? A beautiful stone? No. A love tree root. That's not right either. Amy shook her head as she pulled her little hand out from behind her back, revealing a yellow butterfly hair clip. She smiled as she said, It's a butterfly hair clip. Yellow is your favorite color. Wow. It's so beautiful. Jessica's eyes lit up as she looked at the hair clip in Amy's hand with joy. But after a moment of hesitation, she shook her head and said, No, this is too beautiful. I can't accept it. It'll definitely look better with your dress. No, it'll look better if you wear it. Let me put it on for you. Amy shook her head as she picked up the hair clip and stood on her tiptoes to tuck it into Jessica's hair. She nodded happily and said, It's really beautiful. Jessica, you're so beautiful. Really? A smile also appeared on Jessica's face as she tried her best to look up. Yes, Jessica is really beautiful, Luna said with a smile. She was also a little touched by Amy's feelings for her friend. Thank you, Amy. Jessica hugged Amy with elation as she gently touched the hair clip. She couldn't hide the smile on her face. Meg looked at the yellow butterfly hair clip and her bright smile. She really was very adorable. After a moment of hesitation, he fished out a dragon coin from his pocket and placed it between the boxes of braised chicken and rice. It's getting dark, Jessica. You should go home first so that your mother won't worry. Take this braised chicken and rice home for her. Meg tied up the bag and handed it to Jessica with a smile as he said, Be careful when you carry it. The chicken soup will spill out easily. Thank you, Uncle. Mother will definitely get better soon after eating your food. Jessica accepted the bag and looked at Meg with gratitude. Mag shook his head with a serious expression, and said, You won't get better just from eating a bowl of braised chicken. You have to get your mother to see a doctor. Only after she recovers from her illness can she work, and only then will you be able to enjoy a warm winter at home. All right, I'll tell her. Jessica was also a sensible child. She nodded obediently, then waved her hand and said, Teacher Luna, Uncle, goodbye. Goodbye, Jessica, Luna replied with a smile. Goodbye, Jessica. Amy also waved goodbye. Goodbye, Amy, Jessica said to Amy. Jessica said to Remi as she carefully walked over with the braised chicken in one hand and the box in the other. When the children grow up, they'll be able to live on their own. I'm sure they'll be kind-hearted, Luna said with a smile as she looked at Jessica's departing figure. That's right. You've planted a seed of kindness in their hearts. It'll benefit them for the rest of their lives. Meg also nodded in agreement. Father, will Jessica's mother get better? Amy looked up at Meg with a concerned expression. Chapter 262. After bidding farewell to the children, Meg and Luna walked side by side in the Aden Square under the setting sun. Amy and Ugly Duckling were playing hide-and-seek in front of them, and their bell-like laughter rang out across the entire square. Luna and Mag were talking about how the decimal system and the multiplication table had caused a huge stir in the mathematics world of Rodu. The mathematicians of the Roth Empire were trying to verify the feasibility of the multiplication table, as the decimal system had already been used once when the currency of the continent had been unified. It was the result of a collision between different mathematicians and different mathematical civilizations. However, the Roth Empire still maintained its tradition of using the sexagesimal system, just like how the elves still used the decimal system. Even though the decimal system had been invented by the mathematicians of the entire continent at the time, it had never received much attention. In their eyes, the decimal system was even more complex and difficult to understand, and they even had to convert it back to the sexagesimal system. It could be said that those mathematicians had fallen into the trap of tradition, and had never thought of using the decimal system. As a result, this most advanced and simple algorithm was still only used in the monetary system, even after several decades. However, Meg's multiplication table could quickly calculate single-digit multiplication, and even children would be able to use it with ease as long as they memorized it well. This revolutionary algorithm and discovery was undoubtedly an earth-shattering discovery for the entire mathematics community. The simple permutation method encompassed all single-digit multiplication operations, and was enough to solve all single-digit multiplication problems, so it could easily solve all of the monetary problems in life. If it could be extended to tens and hundreds of digits, the speed and efficiency of the calculations would definitely far exceed that of other systems. It could even provide the possibility of three-digit multiplication, which was almost impossible to achieve in the sexagesimal system. Even Old Man Ferd could only do the simplest three-digit multiplication. Hence, during this period of time, all of the mathematicians of the Roth Empire had gathered in Rodu to discuss this issue. They were all debating whether to abandon the sexagesimal system and adopt the decimal system. The revolutionaries saw a limitless future in the decimal system, while the conservatives thought that the decimal system was just a pseudo-proposition that had yet to be verified. The fact that no one had researched the decimal system for several decades was a testament to this. Now, a random guy was trying to overthrow a tradition that had been passed down for thousands of years with a so-called multiplication table. That was simply absurd. Meg couldn't help but smile as he listened to Luna's description. He didn't think that a simple multiplication table would cause such a stir in this world. Luna stopped in her tracks, and looked at Meg with a serious expression as she said, "Mr. Meg, I was going to visit you today. My grandfather is on the side of the revolutionaries of the reform of the decimal system, so he wants you to come to Rodu and explain the feasibility of the multiplication table to everyone by. I can't do that. Mathematics is just a hobby for me. I can't abandon the restaurant and go to Rodu to teach them the multiplication table." Meg shook his head with a smile as he looked at the Statue of Peace at the center of the plaza in the distance. 2 white doves were perched on the olive branch, and he calmly said, "It's my duty to bring delicacies to my customers." Luna looked at the side profile of Meg's face. The golden light shone down upon him, making him appear as if he were covered in a layer of golden sand. Indeed, he was a prodigy mathematician, but he was also a prodigy chef. Compared to mathematics, It was a pity that a chef like him was missing from this world. She was a little apologetic as she said, "My apologies, Mr. Meg, for making such an unreasonable request." "That's all right. Young Mistress Luna's grandfather is a great educator who is dedicated to popularizing mathematics. If there's anything he needs, he can ask me at any time." Meg shook his head with a smile. He wasn't flexing, but if he were to abandon the restaurant and go to Rodu, the system would most likely go crazy. Furthermore, he had gone through a lot of trouble to get to Chaos City from Rodu, and he didn't want to go back there so quickly. God knew if he would fall into the vortex again. At a time like this, a letter was naturally the best option. "Thank you, I'll pass on your message to him." A smile reappeared on Luna's face. Even though Meg didn't want to go to Rodu, it was still very good news that he was willing to continue to provide his thoughts and ideas. The two of them continued to walk for a while longer. Meg had thought that Luna would bring up the issue of providing assistance to these children, but to his surprise, she didn't say a single word throughout the entire journey. This also made her impression of him quite a bit. This girl was as pure as the white scarf on her shoulder. She was willing to do good deeds, but she wouldn't ask others to do the same for her. The sky gradually darkened, and Luna bade farewell to the two of them. Meg also walked back home with Amy. When they reached the center of the square, they saw a row of magic crystal walls that were around 4 meters tall on the side of the street. There were a few magic casters instructing the workers on how to install them. "The war is going to start tomorrow." Meg looked at the crystal walls with anticipation in his eyes. These were most likely the preparations for the Aiden Square food competition that was going to begin the next day. Now that he was going to do it, he naturally wanted to get closer to the top. When they returned to the restaurant, there were still a few customers reading the notices at the entrance. When they saw Meg and Amy return, they hurriedly gathered around them with concerned expressions on their faces. "Mr. Mack, I heard that the restaurant was destroyed. Are you guys all right?" Meg was quite touched by the customer's concern, and he shook his head with a smile as he replied, "We're fine. The culprits have already been taken away by the Grey Temple. The restaurant was only slightly damaged, but it won't affect our business tomorrow." "Yeah, all the bad guys were burned to ashes by Amy's fireball." Amy nodded in agreement. "Little boss is the best." Everyone burst into laughter upon hearing that. As long as Meg and Amy were both fine, everything was fine. "Then, Mr. Mack, we haven't eaten yet. Why don't you make us something to eat? If the new dish is ready, why don't we?" A bald man looked at Meg with a smile. He didn't finish his sentence, but what he wanted to say was self-evident. "I'm sorry. Something like this happened today, and my young heart has been severely damaged. I need to calm down and rest, so I need to take a break today to calm myself down. Please go back, everyone. We'll open the restaurant as usual tomorrow, and we'll be serving the new dish." Meg calmly refused as he led Amy into the restaurant. "This." The customers looked at one another in bewilderment as they watched the door close. "Forget it. We should be considerate of Mr. Mack at a time like this. I just heard that there was a huge explosion in the restaurant at noon. A group of dozens of culprits surrounded the restaurant and destroyed it in all sorts of ways. The Grey Temple had to send a large army to suppress them," a small old man said as he slowly turned to leave. "That terrifying? Then forget it. Let's look forward to the new dish tomorrow. We have to come early to line up." Chapter 263. Within a dimly lit cave, a white-robed elf sat with her legs crossed beneath the Tree of Life. A wisp of green light rose up from her body, connecting her to the Tree of Life behind her. Specks of fireflies were gathered between the heart-shaped leaves, forming a revolving light barrier around her. The green light shone upon her exquisitely beautiful face, and the small golden moon on her glabella seemed to be glowing. Her expression was relaxed and natural, and it was as if she had already fused as one with the Tree of Life. The entire cave was extremely quiet, and even the sound of the fireflies flapping their wings could be heard. "Your Highness Irina." Right at this moment, the door of the cave opened slightly to the side, and Phyllis squeezed in from the side before running toward the Tree of Life. The green branches brushed past her body, and she wasn't obstructed on this occasion, but it still took her quite a bit of effort to reach the Tree of Life. What happened this time, Bean Sprout? Irina asked in a calm voice without opening her eyes. Your Highness. There's new news from Rodu, but it looks like Snar won't be able to come back for the time being. Phyllis said in a quiet voice with a dejected expression. There was a red gash on her neck, as if she had been whipped by something. Irina immediately opened her eyes, and the green light above her head instantly receded. All of the fireflies around her also dispersed before flying upward. Who did this? Irina's gaze fell on the gash on Phyllis' neck, and she looked into Phyllis' eyes as she asked. I'm fine, Your Highness. Phyllis hurriedly shook her head as she covered her neck with her hands in a panicked manner. What happened to Snar? Irina wasn't in a hurry to ask any more questions. Snar was attacked by an unknown demon and sustained some injuries. He's still recuperating in the embassy of Rodu, and his life isn't in any danger. However, his right leg has been injured, and he can't get out of bed yet, so he won't be able to make it back in time, Phyllis replied in a concerned manner. It's been so many years, and someone's finally starting to provoke me again. They're always making demons scapegoats, they really haven't learned anything. Irina cast her gaze toward the entrance of the cave with a mocking smile on her face. She slowly rose to her feet, and the branches of the Tree of Life began to rustle as if they were prostrating themselves to create a path for her. Your Highness, Phyllis is completely fine. I accidentally bumped into something. Phyllis hurriedly as she looked at Irina as she made her way toward the entrance. Then let the thing you hit take responsibility. The stone door slowly slid to the side and opened completely. She stood at the entrance of the cave and looked at the forest outside. In the end, she fixed her eyes on a big tree that was thick enough for several people to wrap their arms around it. She said in a commanding tone, Do you want to come out yourself, or do you want me to make you come out? Under the moonlight, the forest was quiet. Only the sound of insects could be heard. Very good. Irina's expression remained calm as she slowly raised her right hand and clenched it into a fist. Bam! With a muffled sound, a hole was blasted open in the middle of the tree. A black figure directly pierced through the tree and flew over. His throat was about 5 centimeters away from him, and he was suspended in mid-air. This was an elderly female elf with a slightly stooped figure. She wore a black robe that covered her entire body, and her hooked nose was a little long, giving her the appearance of an old witch. Her blooded face was filled with horror, and she reflexively tried to avert her eyes at the sight of Irina, but her neck was completely immobilized. Irina's brows furrowed slightly as she calmly asked, I remember you. You're the black dog following behind that old witch. You're the one who bit the bean sprout, right? You're not allowed to insult Mistress Helena, Heidi yelled as she glowered at Irina. She was looking at Irina with a crazed look in her eyes, as if she wanted to perish together with her. Doggy Helena, bite me if you don't like it, old dog. Irina was still raising her left hand with a smile on her face. You're a slut who insults our elven race. How dare you insult the esteemed Mistress Helena? You're a disgrace to the elven race. You should be nailed to the Tree of Life. Heidi yelled in a crazed manner as she glared at Irina with gritted teeth, looking as if she wanted to tear her apart. Bullshit. Her Highness. Her Highness is the pride of the elven race and the idol of the younger generation, Phyllis yelled as she looked at Irina's back with a panicked expression. Shut up. Irina's brows furrowed slightly as she raised her right hand, only to stop it in mid-air. You're a sinner who's been imprisoned under the Tree of Life. You dare to hit me? A smug look appeared on Heidi's face at the sight of Irina's frozen hand, and a hint of disdain appeared in her eyes as she looked at Irina. I don't want to dirty my hands. Irina also withdrew her left hand. Right at this moment, a green branch shot out of the cave, bypassing Irina before striking Heidi in the face with a vicious slap. Heidi's body flew through the air as if she had been struck by a sledgehammer, and she crashed into a tree with a thump, causing the tree to sway violently. When the truth is revealed, you're going to be despised by all of our elven brethren. Even if you have a sharp tongue, I'd like to see how many mouths you'll have to offer when the time comes. Heidi fell to the ground and threw up a mouthful of blood, along with a few black teeth. Half of her face was swollen, and the bright red mark on it was quite a frightening sight to behold. She looked up at Irina with a crazed look in her eyes. I, Irina, have done everything with a clear conscience, so there's no need for me to explain myself to anyone. Irina's expression remained calm as she looked up at the bright moon in the sky, and her expression gradually cooled as she said, just because I can't leave the cave doesn't mean I can't. Tell Helena that if Snar doesn't return to me in one piece in 7 days, then she can prepare to collect the corpses of all of the elven brethren that she's nominated over the years. Irina turned and walked into the cave as she spoke. Heidi looked at Irina's departing figure, and a horrified expression gradually appeared on her face as her body began to tremble uncontrollably. Also, I don't usually kill dogs, but if I do, it's very cruel. Even I'm scared of myself. Irina's footsteps faltered momentarily, and the stone door slowly closed behind her. Silence reigned again. Chapter 264. Father, can you tell me a story? Amy was lying on the bed with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She turned her head to look at Meg, who was reading information about the elven race at the table. Sure. Let me think about what story to tell Amy. Meg put down the information in his hands and sat down on the bed with a smile. The restaurant was usually busy, and Amy often fell asleep before the opening hours were over, so he felt a little guilty that he hadn't told her a story for days. After thinking for a while, his eyes lit up, and he said, "Let me tell Amy a story about Snow White." Okay. Amy nodded happily. Then, she asked curiously, "Is Snow White a princess made of snow?" No, Snow White is a beautiful princess with skin as white as snow. Meg shook his head with a smile. Then, he began to tell Amy the story. In a faraway kingdom, there lived a king and a queen, and they longed for a child. So, they sincerely prayed to the heavens, "God, we are all good kings and queens. Please give us a child." Not long after, the queen gave birth to a cute little princess. The girl's skin was as white as snow, her cheeks were as red as apples, and her hair was black and soft. So, the king and queen named her Snow White. Meg slowly told the story of Snow White in a low voice. The innocent and cute Snow White was almost killed by the evil queen, but she was taken in by the 7 dwarfs. Then, they lived a happy life in the forest. However, the queen didn't give up. She pretended to be a witch and tricked Snow White into eating a poisoned apple. Amy and Ugly Duckling listened carefully. One moment, they were worried about Snow White, and the next moment, they were happy that she had received help from others. In the end, the prince and Snow White lived happily together, but the evil queen was struck to death by lightning and received her punishment. Mag finished the story. He looked at Amy, who was still awake, and stroked her hair. "Amy, if a stranger gave you an apple, would you still eat it?" he asked with a smile. Amy nodded. Her eyes were bright, and she didn't look sleepy at all. Amy was a little conflicted. She thought for a while, and asked, "If I only eat one bite, will I be fine?" "Not even one bite. It's a deadly poison. Even one bite will poison you." Meg shook his head. This little one was really a little glutton. Even if it was a poisoned apple, she would only stop after tasting it. "All right, then Xiao Mi won't eat anymore." Amy nodded with a little disappointment. Then, she looked at Meg with a pitiful look, and asked, "Father, will you find a beautiful but evil queen?" "I'm scared." "Father," he said. He stroked her hair. "As long as I is. Father, you're the best." A relieved smile appeared on Amy's face. Under Meg's caress, she fell asleep. Ugly Duckling snuggled into her arms. It found a comfortable position and also fell asleep. "Little one, you have a lot to worry about. I didn't want to find a stepmother for you." Mag tucked the 2 little ones in with a smile. He bent down and kissed Amy's hair with a doting look on his face. He stood at the bedside and watched the 2 little ones sleep soundly for a while before returning to his desk to continue reading the documents. There was a lot of information, but most of it was about the customs of the elven race and some trivial matters. It was probably a pile of useless information left behind after the useful information had been filtered out. Some of it was even from more than a decade ago. However, Meg had obtained a top-secret information from it. He had already broken through. After all, not everyone knew about Sally. Perhaps he could slowly get the real information from Sally from the information. It was not that Meg didn't get anything. At least he could confirm one thing. Since 3 years ago, the elven princess had been in seclusion with the Tree of Life. She hadn't left the cave. No one had even seen her. Looks like she didn't have anything to do with that incident. The so-called seclusion is most likely a form of imprisonment with no freedom. Meg put all the information back into the bag. He opened the closet and put it into a safe. Then, he lay down on the bed. What kind of woman would she be? Meg thought to himself curiously. Amy's words today made him more determined to find her mother. No matter how good other people were, they were still not the same. After having a strange dream of being whipped the whole night, Meg was woken up by the alarm clock the next morning. He reached out to turn off the alarm clock. He took a look at Amy and Ugly Duckling, who were still sleeping soundly and struggling to hang on the edge of the bed. He got out of bed and put them back next to Amy's pillow. He didn't know how the 2 little ones slept. Every morning, Ugly Duckling would be kicked out of bed. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed at Meg gratefully. Apart from Amy, the little one was close to him. Of course, this probably had something to do with the fact that he would give it all kinds of delicious food. Meg washed up and went downstairs. He had taken a day off yesterday because of a sudden mission from the system, so he was going to do a good business today. He was different from other idle bosses. He was very dedicated to his work. Rather than deriving pleasure from teasing his customers, he preferred to derive a sense of accomplishment from the satisfied expressions of his customers. Due to the fact that there was an additional dish on the menu, the time it took to prepare the ingredients had also been shortened. Thankfully, Meg's physical fitness had been improved, and the food he ate every day could be considered to be highly nutritious. Even if the system didn't restore his physical fitness, his body was still getting better every day. It nurtured his damaged veins and nourished his flesh that had been eroded by magic, and his strength was steadily increasing. At 6 a.m., Meg went upstairs to wake Amy up. She opened her eyes for a while, but immediately closed them again when she heard footsteps. She said softly, "I ate a poisoned apple. I need a kiss to wake her up." "Ah, my dear princess, your father is here to save you." Meg looked at the dramatic Amy, and quickly got into character. He walked over to the bed and bent down to gently kiss Amy's hair. Chapter 265. After breakfast, Meg packed up the food he brought for Crassus, and then pushed his bicycle out. Ugly Duckling hesitated for a long time between staying at home alone and getting car sick, but it still chose to get on the bicycle in the end. He didn't know why it was afraid of staying at home alone. When he locked the door, Meg took a look at the blacksmith shop in Morby, but it still wasn't open. The eerie silence made him feel inexplicably uneasy. After all, this was a neighbor who wanted to make big news. Didn't they say that the explosion was quiet at dawn? Meg was still a little worried since they were so close to each other. Because they had brought takeout, Meg and Amy went into the school together. The door to the magic lab on the 3rd floor was still ajar. Meg reached out to knock twice, and then pushed the door open to let Amy in. He also followed her in. "Good morning, little Amy." Crassus was holding a long-necked crystal container in his hand. There were red, blue, and white potions inside, and they didn't mix with each other. They were slowly entangled in Crassus' hand. "Wow, Master Crassus, what's this?" Amy looked at the crystal container in Crassus' hand with curiosity. Mag was also looking on with a curious expression. As a 10th-tier magic caster, the magic potions concocted by him had to be of the highest quality. It would be a good idea to give Amy a few high-grade magic shields. At the very least, they would be able to ensure her safety. "Open your eyes and don't miss it." Crassus smiled mysteriously. He suddenly shook the bottle, and the 3-colored potions began to swirl in the bottle. The 3 colors entangled together and rose from the thin bottle to form a 3-colored rose. It slowly rose from the bottle, and then was plucked by Crassus. He handed it to Amy with a smile, and said, "Little Amy, do you like it?" "Wow, Shifu is so awesome. What a beautiful flower. Amy loves it so much." Amy reached out to take the tricolored flower with a happy smile on her face. Meg looked at the scene with a strange expression. He had thought that it was some kind of powerful spell, but he did not expect Crassus to spend so much time fiddling with it so early in the morning just to make a flower for Amy. It was really difficult for the famous close combat magician of the continent. It was indeed not easy to please a disciple. "Mr. Mac, did you bring me the braised chicken and sweet tofu pudding?" Crassus looked at Meg expectantly. "That's right. Braised chicken, rice, and tofu pudding." Meg nodded with a smile as he placed the bags on the table. "Master, it's a total of 1,050 copper coins." Amy held the flower in one hand, and extended her other hand with a smile as she said, "Amy also had a braised chicken, rice, and sweet tofu pudding this morning. It's also 1050 copper coins." "All right, I'll give it to you right away." Crassus couldn't help but laugh. Not only was he not filial to his disciple, but he was also responsible for her 3 meals every day. She and Julian were probably the only 2 masters on the entire Norland continent who were like this. Meg felt a little guilty that his child had to pay for her meals at home. He accepted the money from Crassus, and prepared to leave. "By the way, Mr. Mac, Amy's school ends at 4:30 tonight. I have something to do, so can you come and pick her up?" Crassus said as he carefully picked up his food. "All right, then I'll be off." Meg nodded. He patted Amy's hair, and turned to leave. There was no problem at all with him picking up his daughter from school. Crassus had asked him to bring Amy back because he was going to have dinner here. Mag rode his bicycle back to the restaurant, only to find that there were already a few customers lining up at the entrance. All of them greeted Mag warmly upon seeing him, and at the same time, they looked at his bicycle with amazement. This thing was really amazing, but it was clear that it wasn't something that could be ridden by just anyone. Meg greeted everyone with a smile. He opened the door for Yarbemia and Sally, who were also waiting at the entrance, to enter. Then, he closed the door again. Why did that beautiful elf girl come in with him? Does she have some special privileges? A customer asked with confusion. "Fairy. Could it be that she's the mistress of the shop that we've never seen before?" The man beside him widened his eyes in surprise. "Now that you mention it, that might be the case. I've eaten here many times, but I've never seen the boss's wife." "How is that possible? Didn't you see that elf girl just now? She looks like she's only 17 or 18 years old." "Little boss is already 4 years old," someone retorted. "What's so strange about that? Elves look young to begin with. Even if a 300-year-old elf stands in front of you, it's normal for her to still look like a 17 or 18-year-old girl. Elves have a lifespan of 800 years, and elves who practice life magic can even maintain their youthful appearance without aging," the person who had spoken earlier said with a smile. "Maybe she's Mr. Mac's new waitress. Didn't you see her standing with Miss Mia just now? If she's the boss's wife, how could she not have a key? Mr. Mac probably hasn't had enough kneeling on the washboard yet." All of the customers began to discuss Sally's identity, and all kinds of strange speculations popped up in their minds. "Have a seat, Aisha. It's your first time working here, so don't be too nervous. It's okay to be a little slow, but try not to make any mistakes." Meg put down his bicycle, and looked at the dizzy ugly duckling in the basket with a smile. "Boss, if you're making the braised chicken today, do you need me to help you with the turkey?" Yarbemia asked Meg. "Not today. I'm only using chicken drumsticks, so there's no need for extra processing." Meg shook his head. Mia really didn't know how to rest. "All right." Yarbemia nodded with a slightly disappointed expression. "Maybe we can learn Spring is Here Again," Sally suggested in a soft voice. This dance was like a magic dance. Even though some of the movements were a little embarrassing to perform, it was also very captivating. She went back and practiced the dance for an entire night, and she was looking forward to the next dance even more. "Can I?" Yarbemia's eyes also lit up as he looked at Meg. "Of course you can." Meg took out the music box with a smile. He clicked on the dance teaching mode and placed it on the table before going into the kitchen. Even if he was a capitalist, he had to be a virtuous capitalist. "Did you hear? Something big happened at Amy's yesterday." "What big thing? Didn't Mr. Mac take a leave of absence to collect materials? I'm looking forward to today's new product." That was the announcement in the morning. It was replaced with a new announcement yesterday afternoon. It said that the restaurant was attacked by thugs and razed to the ground. There was even a huge crater that was over 10 meters deep in the ground. What the fuck? Who would do such a crazy thing? Chapter 266. It was said that a golden dragon and a 10th-tier demon led a group of ferocious forest trolls to attack the restaurant. The scene was extremely tragic. Those who heard it were heartbroken, and those who saw it cried. The entire restaurant was gone in an instant, a little old man outside the restaurant said with a sigh. Hiss. That's terrifying. The customers in the long line sucked in a breath of cold air and became nervous. Are Mr. Mac and Little Boss okay? Yes. What happened after that? What happened after that? The customers' curiosity was piqued, and they asked with concern. After that, you might not believe it, but Boss Mag rushed out of the ruins with the little boss in one hand and the cleaver in the other. After that, he engaged in a great battle with the giant dragons and demons. It was such a fierce battle that even the light of the sun was covered, the little old man said with emotion as he clicked his tongue. What happened after that? Is Mr. Mac okay? A little girl asked nervously. Of course. Boss Mag was so brave that he could take down the giant dragon and demon with just a cleaver. All the forest trolls were scared out of their wits, and turned to run. Boss Mag caught up to them, and he ended their lives one by one. Poor Ching Ching, you're so pitiful. No one would have thought that the owner of this small restaurant was a dragon slayer. Who could fight him when he took out his knife? The little old man became more and more excited as he spoke. Even his beard was trembling as if he had seen the scene live. Carl, why aren't you telling stories under the stone statue of peace? Why are you here? This story is probably made up, right? Someone in the crowd suddenly said. A young man looked at the little old man with a smile. Hey. It really is the old storyteller under the statue. I was wondering why his voice sounded so familiar. I also like to listen to the old man tell all kinds of magical stories, but today's story doesn't seem right. Someone in the crowd quickly recognized the little old man, and they all spoke up. Carl had made quite a name for himself in the Aiden Square. He had begun to tell stories under the Stone of Peace more than 10 years ago. He didn't set the time, and he didn't charge anyone for it. It was all up to his mood, and one could only find him if they were lucky. Moreover, he never repeated his stories. Every time he told a new story, he would tell a new one. Moreover, each of his stories was very vivid and interesting, so he had a group of his own fans. They would wander around the stone statue from time to time. If they met Carl, they would be very lucky. They didn't expect to meet him here today, so they were naturally overjoyed. Stories come from real life, so naturally, they can't be exactly the same as real life. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a story. It's boring to line up, so I'm just trying to make everyone laugh. Carl didn't panic even though he was recognized. Everyone laughed when they heard that. Why don't you say another one? Your stories are really good, someone jeered. No. It's my principle to only tell one story a day, and it's also my principle to finish telling a story. If you tell me now, it will delay my meal. Carl shook his head and refused without hesitation. Everyone was a little disappointed when they heard that. After all, it was a little boring to line up here. Although the sweet and savory parties were divided into two groups, no one was in the mood to argue in the morning. Usually, after a day's work, the best time to conquer each other was at night. Everyone was in high spirits at that time. What do you guys think Mr. Mac will cook today? Someone asked curiously. I saw Mr. Mac riding his two-wheeled bicycle with the little owner at noon yesterday. He was carrying a turkey in his hand. Today's new dish will most likely be related to the turkey, a tall and thin man said. I love chicken soup. I'm looking forward to it, a little girl beside him said with anticipation. By the way, the Aiden Square food competition is starting again today. Did Mr. Mac participate? A young demon with a pair of horns standing at the back of the line chuckled, and said, Yes, I did. I spent half an hour looking at the rankings board before I finally found the braised chicken. It's most likely the new dish today. However, Boss Mag seems to have split the sweet tofu pudding and the savory tofu pudding into 2 dishes to make up the numbers. Isn't that the same dish? How could it be the same dish? The sweet tofu pudding is heretical. How can the savory tofu pudding be eaten? It completely ruins the sweetness of the tofu pudding. Everyone's murderous gazes landed on that demon in unison, and the harmonious atmosphere suddenly became tense. Scary. I can't afford to offend him. That young demon lowered his head silently. He didn't expect that his casual remark would incite so much hostility. In my opinion, the top 4 spots on the food competition should be monopolized by Immerse. Of course, the savory tofu pudding can't be on the list. I don't have a problem with the top 4 spots being monopolized by Immerse, but the sweet tofu pudding shouldn't be on the list. In any case, I'm going to give the sweet tofu pudding a bad review later. Yeah, bad review. We'll give it a bad review too. It was early in the morning, but the atmosphere was already tense, and it looked as if a fight would break out at any moment. Sigh, this isn't very peaceful. Meg, who was just about to open the door, couldn't help but sigh when he heard the quarrel outside. These 2 parties were bickering and giving bad reviews, so he was the one who was hurt. It seemed that the so-called 0 negative reviews was only a dream after all. It's time for business. Welcome, Meg said with a smile as he opened the door to the tense customers. Yarbemia and Sally stood off to the side. Mia had a smile on her face, while Sally had a cold expression on her face. Harrison walked in, and a hint of amazement appeared on his face at the sight of Sally. He turned to Meg with a smile, and asked, "Mr. Mack, who is this?" "This is the restaurant's new waitress, Aisha," Meg introduced with a smile. "When it comes to waitresses, Mr. Mack, you're the only one I admire." Harrison gave Meg a heartfelt thumbs up. Yarbemia, who was diligent, beautiful, and full of energy, was already enviable enough. Now, there was an elegant and cold elven waitress. Just the appearance of the waitress was enough to attract a lot of customers. This was cheating. "This braised chicken and rice is the new dish, right? Why is it so expensive?" "It's 800 copper coins, Mr. Mack. Is this a rooster that can lay eggs?" someone couldn't help but exclaim as he flipped open the menu. Chapter 267. 800 copper coins? That's enough for 4 bowls of tofu pudding. "It's a little expensive," a young woman said in a low voice. "That's right. The prices of the previous 2 dishes have been decreasing. I thought that the price of this new dish would be lower. I secretly saved 500 copper coins and prepared to try this new dish. I didn't expect that it wouldn't be enough at all." A young man in short combat attire sighed. "Mr. Mack's tricks aren't something normal people like us can understand. It's not that I don't want to spend 800 copper coins, but I should at least see if it's worth the price." Harrison pulled out a chair and sat down. This time, he wasn't in a hurry to order. The faint aroma of chicken soup wafted out of the kitchen, causing one's imagination to run wild. However, since it was 800 copper coins per serving, there were quite a few people who ordered other dishes. No one had ordered the braised chicken and rice yet. "Boss, I'll try the braised chicken and rice," Carl said to Meg as he pulled out a chair and sat down. "Sure, please wait a moment." Meg nodded with a smile. He nodded encouragingly at Sally and walked quickly to the kitchen. "Good luck, don't be nervous." "I'll help you," Yarbemia said to Sally in a low voice. She smiled and began to help customers order. "Old Mr. Carl, you're really generous. 800 copper coins for a braised chicken and you ordered it just like that," Jimmy said as he looked at Carl. He was also a loyal fan of Carl's. His family owned a small shop, and his shop was right in front of the peace badge. He had grown up in the Aiden Square, and he had always been fascinated by Carl's stories. Everyone was also looking at Carl with great interest. Those who wanted to order weren't in a hurry. After all, 800 copper coins was enough for a plate of Yeongju fried rice and a bowl of tofu pudding. I have faith in Boss Mag's culinary skills. If he dares to bid 800 copper coins without any real skills, then he'll be ruining his own reputation, Carl said nonchalantly. He wasn't worried at all. "You're right. Mr. Mack has never disappointed us." Jimmy nodded in agreement. However, He was still helping out at his family's restaurant and could only earn a few thousand yuan a month. He couldn't bear to order the braised chicken and rice that cost 800 yuan a plate. Meg wasn't in a hurry at all. After all, he could only make 3 pots of braised chicken and rice in the morning, and each pot had 16 servings. With how delicious the braised chicken was, it wouldn't be long before it was sold out. After all, most customers who could afford a plate of Yangju fried rice at 600 copper coins wouldn't mind spending an extra 200 copper coins on a plate of braised chicken and rice. Most of them were just watching because they didn't want to waste their money. Everyone took their seats, and some of them started gossiping in low voices. Those who were bored could enjoy the beautiful gestures of Yabemia and Sally when they served their guests. Now, the two parties had reached a tacit agreement to not bring their quarrel into the restaurant, and to try their best to finish it outside the restaurant. That way, everyone would feel more comfortable while eating. The customers who ordered the tofu pudding and rujiamos were quickly served. Many people ordered the tofu pudding and waited for Carl's braised chicken and rice to arrive. "Gyurge, do you think the braised chicken and rice will be delicious?" Harrison asked softly as he looked toward the kitchen. "Of course, I trust Mr. Mack's cooking. I heard that chicken soup is very nutritious, and Miranda's appetite and body have been getting better and better after eating Mr. Mack's Yangju fried rice. Her belly is also getting bigger and bigger, so I'm going to buy her some fire chicken to make chicken soup. If Mr. Mack's braised chicken and rice also has chicken soup, then I'll just buy it. If it's made by the cook at home, she'll probably stop eating it after a few bites." Gyurge nodded with a smile. "I'm so envious of the relationship between you two. I can't help but want to find a wife," Harrison said with a tinge of jealousy. He had only come out for a meal, but he was suddenly presented with a mouthful of dog food, and he couldn't refuse it. Just as they were talking, Yabemia walked out of the kitchen with a tray in his hands. There was a brown casserole bowl and a bowl of rice on the tray, and he quickly made his way over to Carl's table. The rich aroma of the mushroom chicken soup wafted past everyone, and everyone's attention was immediately drawn to the bowl. "This chicken soup smells so good. Yeah, the chicken soup I make at home isn't as fragrant, but I can still smell it. It's not just the chicken, there seems to be a special aroma in there as well. It's so intoxicating." Everyone couldn't help but gasp in amazement as they stared at the bowl of braised chicken and rice in Yabemia's hands. "Here's your braised chicken and rice." Yabemia walked over to Carl's table, and placed the braised chicken and rice on the tray in front of him with a smile. Carl's attention was completely drawn to the braised chicken in front of him. There was a layer of golden chicken cubes and all kinds of side dishes, and a spoonful of thick, golden red chicken soup. The rich and alluring aroma wafted toward him, and he couldn't help but close his eyes and take a deep breath. "Is this shiitake mushroom?" Carl's gaze was fixed on the shredded shiitake mushroom in the bowl, and he was a little surprised. "Shiitake mushroom?" All of the customers were perplexed. They clearly didn't know what it was. "Master Carl, what is this shiitake mushroom?" Jimmy asked curiously. Shiitake mushroom is a precious ingredient that can only be found by chance. It has a smooth texture, and it's delicious. I've only eaten it once in the wind forest, and I still can't forget that delicious taste to this day. After that, I asked a lot of people to purchase it from the elven race, but I was only able to buy 1 or 2 every once in a while. I could only tear off some of them and add them to the soup when I was boiling it, and I spent at least 100 gold coins on each one." Carl's eyes lit up as he looked into the bowl. He picked up a shredded shiitake with his chopsticks, and praised, "They were both sent here after being dried, but the quality is completely different from this one. Furthermore, this rich aroma is far superior to what I've had before. It's definitely the best." 100 gold coins. Everyone couldn't help but draw a sharp intake of breath upon hearing this. Just who was this Master Carl? How could he spend so much money and manpower just to eat a small shiitake mushroom? Of course, what was even more shocking to everyone was that Mr. Mack had just casually added the shredded shiitake mushroom into his new dish as a side dish, even though Carl had spent so much money to try it. This was a shiitake mushroom that cost over 100 gold coins. Even though the shiitake mushroom in the bowl had been shredded into thin strips, there couldn't be more than one. Furthermore, according to Master Carl, This thing was simply priceless, let alone a few bottles of it. Ordinary people couldn't even see it, let alone eat it. In the kitchen, Meg's lips curled up slightly as he listened to Carl's words. This was the first customer who had recognized the shiitake mushroom. It seemed like he was also a glutton. However, he didn't expect shiitake mushrooms to be so precious in this world. If that was the case, the price was set too low. Chapter 268. An alluring aroma wafted through the restaurant, and all of the customers couldn't help but stare at Carl as he put the shiitake mushroom into his mouth. This taste. Carl's eyes immediately lit up as he took a bite of the shiitake mushroom. The thick and delicious chicken broth seeped out of the shiitake mushroom, and a delicious taste blossomed in his mouth. This was the unique taste of the mellow chicken broth combined with the delicious mushroom aroma. His taste buds were almost instantly activated, and it was as if they were dancing on the tip of his tongue. Even though it's dried shiitake mushroom, it's not dry at all. It's soft and smooth, and the unique aroma of the shiitake mushroom surges straight into my head. This aroma doesn't ruin the rich taste of the chicken broth at all. Instead, it elevates the taste of the chicken broth to the extreme. The shiitake mushroom also becomes more flavorful after absorbing the rich chicken broth. They complement each other perfectly. Carl couldn't help but think to himself as he savored the taste of the shiitake mushroom. Compared to this, the shiitake mushroom I've eaten in the past is indeed far inferior. Mr. Mac really is a genius, both in terms of the quality and the cooking method. If he had released it earlier, I wouldn't have had to spend so much effort searching for shiitake mushrooms all these years. Carl praised from the bottom of his heart. He picked up his chopsticks and put another piece of shiitake mushroom into his mouth, chewing slowly with an expression of enjoyment. He then picked up his bowl of rice and ate 2 mouthfuls, and his expression became even more joyful. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed instantly rang out in the restaurant. All of the customers were drooling as they watched Carl put a piece of chicken into his mouth with an expression of enjoyment. If it weren't for the fact that they knew that Carl had made a name for himself in the Aden Square over the past 10 years, the peace badge would soon be filled with people listening to his stories. Many people would even put gold and silver coins in front of him, but he never accepted them. Every time he finished telling a story, he would ask people to take back their money, and give the rest of the unclaimed money to the homeless children. A person like him who didn't care about money naturally wouldn't act as a prop for Mr. Mac. Of course, after seeing him eat a shiitake mushroom for over 100 gold coins, everyone understood one thing. It wasn't that he didn't care about money, it was just that those 10 gold coins weren't worth it for him to bend over. "Boss, give me a portion of braised chicken and rice. I want one too. I want one here too." The sound of people ordering rose and fell one after another. Meg's face also revealed a smile. The good thing about meeting professional foodies was that he didn't need to explain himself. He could let the customers know how awesome this dish was. As the dishes of braised chicken were brought out, the alluring aroma of chicken soup filled the entire restaurant, attracting even more customers to place their orders. "I'm sorry, sir, but the braised chicken takes a long time to cook. If you order now, you'll have to wait for half an hour. Are you sure you want to order?" After the 16 servings of braised chicken were served, Yarbemia smiled at a customer who wanted to order braised chicken. Waiting for half an hour for a delicacy is naturally worth it. "Go ahead and order." The customer laughed. "Can I pack a portion to take with me?" Gyurge asked as he looked at Yarbemia. There was already a half-eaten portion of braised chicken and rice in front of him. Even though there wasn't much chicken soup, he was sure that Miranda would love to eat it. Furthermore, he was feeling very warm and comfortable after eating it, and it was very nourishing. I'll have to ask boss about this." A hesitant look appeared on Yarbemia's face. Even though Meg didn't set a limit on the number of servings of braised chicken, with the speed at which they were ordering and Meg's cooking, there was no guarantee that the customers in the restaurant would be able to afford it. "Take the braised chicken out. Only 1 portion per person. I hope your wife will like it." Meg smiled at Gyurge as he stood at the entrance. He had become familiar with Gyurge during this period of time, and he knew that Gyurge had 3 sons, and his wife was pregnant with a 6-month-old child. Thank you, Mr. Mac. I'm sure Miranda will like it very much, George said as he looked at Meg with a grateful expression. Not long ago, Miranda had no appetite, and would vomit everything she ate. She was so weak that it seemed like she would collapse at any moment, and that had been a source of worry for George. However, after eating Meg's Yangju fried rice, her appetite had completely recovered, and her health had also improved significantly. A few days ago, even the doctor had been surprised by her health, and had said that the child was developing very well, and that if she continued to maintain her health, she would be able to give birth without any problems. This was definitely good news for George. He had been most worried about Miranda's health, and Meg's appearance was like a savior who had saved them all. Meg returned to the kitchen with a smile on his face. George's sons were classmates with Amy, so he naturally couldn't be too stingy. Bill, 2 people, a demon called out. That'll be 10 gold coins, Sally said in a cold voice as she stepped forward and glanced at the 2 bowls and 2 Ruggiamo bags on the table. Waitress, why don't you smile? Look at how beautiful Miss MIA is when she smiles. Only smiles can make people feel warmth and love. Come on, smile, the fierce-looking demon said earnestly as he stared at Sally. Here are the 10 gold coins. The other demon hurriedly placed 10 gold coins on the table, and dragged the demon toward the door as he whispered, You're crazy. How dare you flirt with a waitress? I don't want to be blacklisted with you. The demon's expression changed slightly upon hearing that, and he said with a serious expression, How is that flirting? It's a serious suggestion. Don't spout nonsense. Look at how wretched you are when you speak. How can you be so serious? Who are you calling vulgar? The 2 demons argued as they walked out of the door. Sally's gaze lingered on their backs for a while, and a bluish-purple light slowly faded from her hand. She put away the gold coins on the table, and suddenly remembered something. She hurriedly yelled at the 2 demons who were about to open the door, Stop right there. Huh! The customers looked at her in confusion, wondering how the 2 customers had offended this beautiful elf waitress who was as cold as an ice mountain. The 2 demons who were holding the doorknobs suddenly froze. They looked at each other, and their expressions fell. They turned around with bitter faces. The first demon looked at Sally with a smile that was uglier than crying, and said, Miss, I was wrong. Even if you didn't smile, I still felt infinite warmth and love. Please let us go, and don't be blacklisted. Chapter 269. Huh! The 2 demons looked at the blue ticket in Sally's hand, and their expressions became strange. The Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square Aiden Square had a history of several decades. It was released once a month, and almost all of the powerful restaurants in the Aiden Square would participate in it. Today was the first day of this month's competition, and the first day of voting. Okay. The 2 demons nodded at almost the same time. Although they had mixed feelings, as long as they weren't on the blacklist, it was fine. They walked back, took the tickets, and sat down obediently. Looks like Mr. Mac is really going to make it to the top this time. It's a good thing to make it to the top, but I have mixed feelings. I'm afraid that such a good restaurant will be overlooked, and I'm also worried that the restaurant will be overcrowded by tourists who follow the rankings. Yeah. Usually, you have to wait for a long time to eat a meal, but you can eat it as long as you wait. I'm afraid you won't even be able to eat it in the future. When the guests saw this scene, they began to discuss softly with complicated expressions on their faces. Sally stood beside the table with a tray, and the 2 demons sat in front of the table with pens in their hands. They looked even more obedient than elementary school students. There were 5 dishes on each ticket, and the names and prices of the dishes were all written in beautiful handwriting in advance. The customers only needed to tick the dishes they wanted to eat at the back. The ratings for each dish were overall review, taste, environment, and service. Each dish was scored on a 5-point scale, with 5 points being very satisfied, 4 points being very satisfied, 3 points being satisfied, 2 points being average, and 1 point being extremely bad. In addition, they could also write a rating below each dish. Overall rating, 5 points. Taste, 5 points. Environment, 5 points. Service. The 2 demons looked up at Sally at the same time, and then emphasized, 5-point rating. Very good. The two demons put down their pens at the same time and looked at Sally with a dry smile. Is this okay? Yes. Sally glanced at the tickets in their hands and nodded with satisfaction. Can we go now? The first demon asked again. Yes. Sally nodded. The two demons stood up and walked quickly to the door as if they had been pardoned. They didn't heave a sigh of relief until they were out of the door. Scary. It's all because you talk too much. Let's go, let's go. We still have to do a few more missions today. What about the service rating? You want to change it? The two of them turned back to look in the direction of the restaurant at the same time. They immediately shook their heads and quickly left. Sally stacked the bowls and chopsticks on the table and placed them on the tray. She then cast a small water magic spell on the table with her right hand, and the surface of the table immediately became so shiny that it looked like a mirror. It was much cleaner than when it was wiped with a rag, and the customers at the other two tables were stunned. Are you embarrassed to be a waiter without any special abilities now? The same thought flashed through everyone's mind. See, if you don't study hard, you won't even be able to be a waiter. A father tapped his son's head and warned him seriously. I got it. The little boy nodded his head in agreement and strengthened his determination to study hard. Sally glanced at the customers, and they immediately lowered their heads to eat. Strange, why do these people seem to be afraid of me? Am I not gentle enough? Sally carried the tray to the kitchen, and she was a little perplexed. In the past, she would never speak more than 3 words to a man, but today, she was doing her best to appear more amiable and friendly. Yarbemia came out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of braised chicken. When she passed by Sally, she gave her a thumbs up and an encouraging smile on her face. Sally nodded slightly as if she had regained her confidence. She quickened her pace and put the bowls and chopsticks into the dishwasher that she had learned how to use. This magical thing would automatically wash the bowls with a press of the button, and the bowls would be as clean as the ones she had washed with magic. She had said that she could use magic to wash the bowls and chopsticks, but this suggestion was rejected by Meg. He didn't want her to use too much magic power. Well done. Keep hugging. Meg looked at Sally and encouraged her with a smile. He didn't want to force Sally to keep smiling like Yarbemia. With her personality, it would be worse than death. It was fine as long as she didn't make the customers feel uncomfortable. Okay. Sally nodded. She felt that her body was full of energy, and her hands moved a little faster. When she heard that someone was paying the bill, she quickly walked out of the door. With Sally taking care of the bill and clearing the table, Yarbemia was a lot more at ease. She greeted all the customers with a smile and brought them a warm morning. Sally, who was collecting the bill, gave the customers a refreshing feeling. All of a sudden, they felt refreshed and cooperated with her to fill in the tickets. Mr. Mac's restaurant is definitely a 5-star restaurant, but I think it's necessary to point out the right direction for the future customers. Is the sweet tofu pudding suitable for human consumption? Sweet tofu pudding, 1 star. Extremely bad. After a customer finished writing his order for the savory tofu pudding and the braised chicken and rice, he looked at the sweet tofu pudding. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He waved his pen and gave it 1 star. Fuck. How dare he give the sweet tofu pudding 1 star? What the hell is the savory tofu pudding? I want to give it 1 star too. 1 star it is. I'm not afraid. The savory party will win. We're the savory party who's not afraid of anyone. That customer's words were like a fuse that ignited the sweet and savory parties, who were at peace with each other. Both parties started to give each other 1 star. Sally looked at this scene and didn't know what to do. Although she also liked the sweet tofu pudding, Mr. Mac had just told them the importance of this competition. If they gave each other 1 star, it was very likely that both the sweet and savory tofu pudding would fail to make the rankings. Let's do as they wish. Meg suddenly appeared behind her and said softly. Although he was smiling, he was already cursing in his heart. Sure enough, the situation that he had expected happened. Fortunately, the system required 1 dish to be in the top 30 to complete the task. Ruggiamo was the most popular dish in the restaurant every day. As long as it didn't affect the Ruggiamo's ranking, it was fine. Okay. Sally nodded slightly. Hearing Meg's words, she immediately calmed down and continued to pay the bill and clear the table. Chapter 270. The woman was about 23 or 24 years old. She was very pretty, and her eyebrows were thin and curved. She looked very gentle. Her slightly curly brown hair was casually tied up in the middle with a black cloth. She was wearing a long white dress, and there were only a few patches of green grass at the waist and sleeves. She looked up at the man beside her with a smile, and it seemed that he was the only person in her golden eyes. The man called Lulu was a head taller than the woman, and looked to be about 30 years old. He had a square face, and was as muscular as a bear. His dark brown hair was cut short, and he was wearing a brown bearskin shirt. He was carrying an intricate bamboo basket on his back, and there seemed to be a lot of things in it. However, the basket was so tightly woven that it was impossible to see what was in it. The man looked down at the woman beside him, and his golden eyes were also filled with love. He reached out with a big hand to brush away a strand of hair that was hanging in front of the woman's forehead. He shook his head with a smile, and said, 1111, although Chaos City has the best security on the Norland continent, those people could still follow us here, so we can't let our guard down. I see. Those people are so annoying. 1111's expression became a little dejected. It's okay. You can focus on eating. I'll be right behind you to protect you no matter what. Lulu reached out with a big hand, and gently placed it on 1111's head. Her movements were a little clumsy, but she couldn't hide the love in her eyes. Hehe, I knew Lulu was the best. Let's go eat. A radiant smile immediately appeared on 1111's face. She rubbed her head against Lulu's big hand, and walked in front happily. Lulu looked around, and the good-natured expression on her face became serious. Then, she strode behind 1111. Bill, please. Carl put down the spoon in his hand, and finished 2 bowls of rice and a big bowl of braised chicken. He burped with satisfaction. That's 8 gold coins, Sally said coldly as she walked over. It was worth it. Carl pulled out a dragon coin and handed it to Sally. He then accepted the 2 gold coins that he had given back, and made his way to the entrance of the kitchen. He turned to Mag with a curious expression, and asked, Boss Mag, where did you get so many shiitake mushrooms? Can you tell this old man about it? Sorry, I really can't say that. He smiled and shook his head. How could he say that? Could it be that the system planted them in the wind forest? The elf race's army would probably arrive tomorrow. I'm just curious. Anyway, only Mr. Mac can make shiitake mushrooms so delicious in this world. The old man can't make them himself. Carl was still unwilling to give up. I'm sorry. Meg still smiled and shook his head. All right, but Mr. Mac is such a nice businessman. He put 4 or 5 shiitake mushrooms in his braised chicken, and he only charged 800 copper coins for it. That's way too cheap. Carl couldn't help but sigh as he turned around and walked out of the restaurant. Meg withdrew his gaze and continued to cook. He was in a good mood as he listened to the praises coming from outside. The 48 braised chicken plates were quickly ordered. Even though they had to wait for an hour, many customers still chose to order a plate and wait. This was nothing compared to missing out on delicious food. After the morning opening hours, Meg rotated his sore wrists. Although his physical fitness had improved a lot, he had to cook 2 pots of Yangju fried rice, braised chicken, 100 rujiamos, and 200 servings of tofu pudding all by himself in an hour and a half. Meg already felt that he was Superman. After a whole morning of work, Sally had become more and more familiar with the cashier's job. Her cold service style was also recognized by the customers. According to Meg's careful observation, the customers who appeared to be trembling in fear were probably secretly delighted. In other words, she was the legendary masochist. Of course, most of the customers were normal. After all, although Sally gave people the impression that she was a little cold, she still spoke and acted elegantly, and the customers felt comfortable with an appropriate distance from her. With Sally's addition, the restaurant's operation became a little easier. Meg also saw a lot of room for improvement, which was what he cared about the most. After all, as the number of dishes in the restaurant increased, so did the number of customers. It would only get busier and busier in the future. This was the time to test the ability of the waitresses. Meg didn't plan to hire too many waitresses, as that would make the restaurant too noisy. It would be best if 2 waitresses could handle the current situation. 2 waitresses each had their own strengths, and they were the most suitable for the current restaurant. Boss, MIA, I'll go back first. I'll come back in the afternoon. Sally cleaned the restaurant with water magic, and left after saying goodbye. Meg knew that Sally was working 2 jobs. Meg didn't know what to say about a noble lady like her being reduced to working as a waitress in a restaurant and a cleaner in a small hotel. After all, with this lady's ability, she could go to the Chaos Guild and accept some missions, and the rewards she would receive would be far greater than the salary of these 2 jobs. However, Sally's identity had to be kept a secret. If she went to the Chaos Guild, her real identity might be exposed. Therefore, she chose to work as a waitress in the restaurant so that she could eat the delicious food in the restaurant for all 3 meals. MIA, you should take a break too. Meg took off his apron and hung it off to the side. Ever since Sally took over the cleaning of the restaurant, Yarbemia's workload had decreased significantly, and she had nothing to do after the closing hours. Yarbemia shook her head and said, "No need, boss. Let me give you a massage. Aisha did a lot today, and I'm not tired at all." "Sure." Meg nodded and pulled out a chair for himself. Yarbemia wasn't someone who could sit still anyway, and his shoulders and arms were indeed a little sore. In the center of the Aiden Square, in front of a magic screen, the employees of the Aiden Square Catering Association were busy counting the tickets they had received in the morning. The Aiden Square food rankings were updated once a day, and the current rankings were based on the previous month's rankings. If there weren't any dark horse restaurants, the rankings wouldn't change too much, and that would greatly reduce the workload of the employees. "Luther, what rank do you think the restaurant we went to yesterday will rank tomorrow?" Alvin asked softly as he helped Luther move the table. There are a total of 341 restaurants participating in this month's Aiden Square Food Rankings competition. "I think it'll rank 340, Luther said with a smile. "Why not rank 341? Alvin asked with a perplexed expression. "Didn't a restaurant sign up yesterday before it even opened?" The owner said that it was only going to appear on the rankings as an advertisement, so it shouldn't lose to a restaurant that hasn't even opened yet, right? Luther chuckled. Chapter 271. 5 tables were arranged in a row in front of the magic screen, and there was a ballot box in front of each table. Staff members of the Catering Association in red vests were collecting and registering the votes. All of the votes had to be checked on a crystal ball. Those that emitted a green light were counted, while those that emitted a red light were discarded. Look at this restaurant. Why are the prices so high? Tofu pudding costs 200 copper coins per helping, Rugiamo costs 300 copper coins per helping, that Yangju fried rice costs 600 copper coins. The most expensive dish, the braised chicken, costs 800 copper coins, a short-haired young man among the staff members exclaimed. He held a ticket in his hand, and an incredulous expression appeared on his face as he said, "A customer spent 1,000 copper coins for breakfast." "Huh! Isn't this that restaurant? There's a customer so early in the morning." Luther and Alvin, who had just set down their tables, were both surprised. In my opinion, the boss was probably worried that the ticket would be too ugly, so he asked his staff to send one secretly. Who would spend 1,000 copper coins to eat breakfast in a restaurant in the corner early in the morning? However, the way we count the votes is that each person can cast 1 valid vote per day. Who knows, he might even get 10 votes in the end. Alvin curled his lips, expressing his disdain for such behavior. I thought that only the big restaurants would cheat, but I didn't think that this small restaurant would do the same. The amount of money spent on a ticket accounts for 30% of the total score, so his 10 tickets are worth more than 100 tickets from other restaurants. If you ask me, we should have changed the ranking system a long time ago. More and more customers are beginning to question our fairness. Luther shook his head with an annoyed expression. Sure, keep your voice down. Do you think low-level employees like us have the final say in this? Even though our catering association belongs to the City Lord's castle, the restaurants of the Chamber of Commerce are still the ones that pay the most money every month. Let's just turn a blind eye to this kind of thing. Alvin shushed them before looking around with a nervous expression. I know that, but I've worked here for more than 20 years. The ranking list when I was young was not like this. The restaurant ranking list was chosen by the customers themselves, and it was widely praised. Ever since the family Morton took complete control of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, everything has changed. They're just using us as tools. Luther sighed. He was both annoyed and helpless. Is it that restaurant called Mammy? I have one here as well, and it costs 1,300 copper coins. Right at this moment, another ticket inspector spoke out. There's another one. Luther and Alvin were surprised and even angrier. I still have 3. They cost 500 copper coins, 1,000 copper coins, and 1,100 copper coins respectively. I also have a 200 copper coin note. There are 2 more here. All of the ticket inspectors exclaimed in surprise. It wasn't uncommon to see expensive dishes in the Aden Square, but such a high-end dish that cost several hundred copper coins was usually only seen in high-end restaurants. Such a small and unknown restaurant actually set such a high price and sold so many servings during breakfast time. This was simply impossible in everyone's knowledge. Even at Duca's restaurant, no one would order a whole roast lamb that cost 2,500 copper coins so early in the morning, although the main reason was that the restaurant didn't serve roast lambs in the morning. This is the first time this restaurant is participating in the ranking competition, right? Could it be that they're the dark horse of this competition? Even a dark horse can't be this greedy. Judging from the order, the braised chicken that costs 800 copper coins isn't enough. If they ordered 3 servings, they could go to Duca's restaurant and eat a whole roast lamb. Exactly. I think there's something wrong with this restaurant. Did they falsify the price of their dishes? All of the ticket inspectors began to discuss spiritedly. One of them took out a notebook and flipped through it for a while. He pointed to the last restaurant on the list, and said, if they didn't make a mistake when they signed up, the price of their dishes is exactly the same as the one on the list. Everyone fell silent upon hearing this. They all turned to the thin middle-aged man standing off to the side, and one of them said, Vice President, what do you think we should do? Don't jump to conclusions just yet. As long as the tickets can pass the magic balls inspection, they will be recorded in the book. Count how many customers spent in the morning and the total amount. I will personally go to that restaurant to take a look at it in the afternoon. If they really did violate the rules, then they must be disqualified from the competition and banned from the rankings forever. Robert gestured for everyone to calm down. Vice President Robert was transferred here from the City Lord's castle last year, and has been working hard to rectify the chaos in the ranking competition. Unfortunately, he can't do anything on his own, and his words don't count in the association. Now, all he can do is keep an eye on the ticket inspectors. If there were more officials like him, our association wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Luther looked at the solemn Robert with both respect and pity in his eyes. I think there's definitely something wrong with that restaurant. With Master Robert here, we can't let them do as they please. Alvin clenched his fists. All right. Everyone nodded, and continued to inspect the tickets. The tickets for Amy's were all placed to the side, and soon, everyone had a few dozen tickets in their hands. Vice President, there are 320 tickets in total, and the total cost is 150,400 copper coins. Everyone gathered all the tickets together, and the old accountant with over 30 years of experience in inspecting tickets announced in a shocked voice. Everyone fell silent upon hearing this, and their expressions were one of shock and fury. Even the most popular breakfast restaurant in the Aden Square wouldn't be able to earn 150,000 copper coins from breakfast. Furthermore, this amount of money had come from an unknown restaurant. No one present would believe that this was normal. This guy is too arrogant. He has no regard for the rules at all. Yeah, Vice President, I don't think there's even a need to investigate this. Just disqualify him from the ranking competition and put him on the blacklist forever. The silence lasted for a long while, and someone finally spoke up with an agitated expression. Give me the information on this restaurant. Don't be in a hurry to come to a conclusion. I'll make a decision after I do some field research. Robert was also quite surprised, but he also didn't rush to a conclusion. 150,000 copper coins in revenue was enough to push this restaurant into the top 100, even if the number of votes was very low. If they could maintain this level of revenue in the afternoon and evening, then it wouldn't be difficult for them to squeeze into the top 50. Alright, all the information is here. According to the information submitted by our inspectors, this restaurant has been open for less than a month. The old accountant handed over the information in his hand to Robert. Amy's, the westernmost part of the Aden Square. Robert carefully looked through the information for a while before putting down his hand and looking into the distance with tightly furrowed brows. If this mess wasn't eradicated, then the Restaurant Association would lose all credibility sooner or later. Meg was completely oblivious to what was happening in the square. Only 300 or so tickets had been distributed in the morning, and he was a little worried that he wouldn't be able to make it onto the ranking competition. In particular, the sweet and savory factions were fighting each other, and he couldn't be bothered to think about those two spots. Chapter 272. What new spell did my Amy learn today? Meg asked with a curious smile as he opened the door and welcomed Amy in. The spell Amy learned must be super powerful. After all, Master Crassus is so powerful. Yarbemia smiled as she carried out the dishes. Crassus' power was deeply imprinted in her mind. Sally stood off to the side with a curious look in her eyes. Amy's talent in magic was one of the best she had ever seen. The previous person she looked up to was the elven princess. Her talent and cultivation speed far exceeded that of the younger generation, and she became a legend. She was only in her 20s, but she was already at the top of the entire continent. Master Crassus said it's called the Flaming Wheels. But I've only learned a little bit of it, and I can't fly yet, Amy said with a smile. Flaming Wheels? Meg raised an eyebrow. Why did this name sound so familiar? Wasn't it one of the 3 treasures of that brat, Jar? What was Crassus thinking? How did he come up with such a name? Yes, it's the Flaming Wheels. Father, I'll show you. It's super fun, Amy said excitedly with a nod. Sure. Meg nodded with a smile. He wanted to see what was the difference between the Flaming Wheels and the Flaming Wheels. You have to stand back a little, Amy reminded him. A serious expression appeared on her little face as she chanted a string of magic incantations. Finally, she yelled, Flaming Wheels, appear. 2 balls of flames suddenly appeared beneath Amy's feet. Amy, who was standing on the ground, slowly rose over a dozen centimeters into the air. The flames beneath her feet spewed downward as if she had installed a flamethrower beneath her feet. I didn't know it could do that. Meg's eyes lit up. It was only the 2nd day of school, and Amy had already learned how to fly. As expected, the first step to becoming a prodigy wasn't to learn how to walk. Everyone started from flying. Furthermore, Amy had only just begun to learn this spell. The flames she was spewing had become a spinning wheel. With Amy's learning speed, it was only a matter of time before she became a master. That's awesome. Amy can fly, Yarbemia praised as she looked at Amy with astonishment. Is this the legendary melee magic? Sally was also looking at Amy, who was levitating in the air with the help of flames. Although she could only maintain a height of 10 centimeters in the air, as a 7th-level magician, she knew how difficult it was to control the magic on the surface of the body after releasing it. This was also the reason why there were only a few magicians on the continent who specialized in melee magic, even though Crassus had practiced it to the peak. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling ran around Amy a few times excitedly, but it didn't dare to get too close due to the high temperature of the flames. I'm going to fall. Amy levitated for about 30 seconds before her body swayed, and the flames beneath her feet were extinguished. She looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes, and asked, Father, is Amy super awesome too? Yes, Amy is super awesome. She can learn all kinds of magic in an instant. Meg stroked Amy's hair with a gratified expression. Amy's talent really did surprise even him. If she could keep it up, her rate of improvement would most likely be even faster than his rate of recovery. He suddenly felt a little pressured. This was pressure from his daughter. Alright, go wash your hands and eat. We have braised chicken and rice and tofu pudding for lunch, Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded obediently before picking up Ugly Duckling. She then bade farewell to Yabemia and Sally before walking toward the kitchen. After washing her hands, Amy turned to Meg with a serious expression, and said, Father, why don't I eat a little later? That way, they'll know how delicious braised chicken is, and they'll order more of it. Alright, then let's have a tofu pudding first. Mag placed Ugly Duckling's lunch on the ground, and nodded with a smile. It seemed that Ugly Duckling also enjoyed having customers watch her eat. Alright. Amy nodded before climbing onto a chair. She turned to Ugly Duckling, who was about to dig in with its tongue sticking out, and said, Ugly Duckling, you have to eat less. Otherwise, you're going to put on weight again. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling nodded with an earnest expression before lying down on the ground and eating the tofu pudding with a joyful expression. In the blink of an eye, it had already forgotten about Amy's words. Let's eat, Meg said to Yabemia and Sally before sitting down and picking up his chopsticks. Yabemia held a Rugiamo in her hand, and took a bite. Her golden dragon tail swayed gently behind her back, and she had an expression of enjoyment on her face. She was no longer embarrassed by her tail. Sally sat down and ate her Yangju fried rice in small bites. The braised chicken was delicious, but she still didn't want to eat too much meat. Of course, the price of 800 copper coins was also one of the main reasons why she couldn't afford it. If she ate one, she would only have one tofu pudding for breakfast and one tofu pudding for dinner. Outside the restaurant, 2 long lines had already stretched all the way to the square. Both sides were in a cold war because of the one-star exchange, and there was a rare moment of silence. However, this eerie silence made it seem as if both sides were preparing for a big move, so the atmosphere became even more tense and tense. Crassus didn't come in the morning, and he was a little puzzled by this scene. My lord, the savory party shamelessly gave the sweet tofu pudding a 1-star rating today. If this continues, our favorite sweet tofu pudding will definitely fall to the bottom of the Aden Square food rankings, the young man standing behind Crassus complained angrily. There's actually something like this. Crassus raised his eyebrows. When he arrived, he saw many magic screens with the names of all the restaurants and dishes. He didn't expect them to shamelessly give the sweet tofu pudding a 1-star rating. It would be too infuriating if such a delicious sweet tofu pudding didn't have a good name on the rankings. How did you deal with them? Crassus asked the young man again. We also gave their savory tofu pudding a 1-star rating, the young man said smugly. Millimeter, well done. Giving him a taste of his own medicine. Crassus nodded with satisfaction. He turned to look at Julian with a cold smile, and said, savory tofu pudding, a 1-star rating. I'm very good at hurting each other. Julian cracked a cold smile, and the air seemed to have become a little colder. Lulu, look, there are so many people lining up over there. There must be a lot of good food. Let's go and have a look. 1111 pointed at the long line in front of Mammy Restaurant with a green onion pancake in her hand, and said, that's right. But, we've been eating for the entire morning, and we haven't even lasted 15 minutes. Lulu looked at 1111 with a resigned expression. She was still carrying some food in her hands. But, I'm not full yet. Let's go. 1111 pouted and looked at him coquettishly. Chapter 273. Boss, did they really come to Chaos City? At the western city gate of Chaos City, 6 men dressed as hunters with crossbows strapped to their waists and longbows strapped to the backs of their horses were lining up to enter the city. A young man among them asked the bearded man standing at the front of the line. We followed them all the way here, so they should have entered the city. That white cat is the most gluttonous, so it would definitely enter a big city like this. That stupid bear listens to everything she says. After we enter the city, we just have to ask around about the place with the most food and we will definitely find them. The bearded man nodded in response. His voice was a little low and hoarse, and there was a faint layer of crimson over his dark brown eyes as he looked up at the words Chaos City above the city gate. Boss, I heard that Chaos City is very strict. Will someone come out to stop us? Someone behind him asked. As long as we act fast enough, that won't be a problem. We don't have to keep them alive anyway. The bearded man smiled, revealing a mouthful of sharp yellow teeth. That's right. These are the last two. It's about time that the curse on our brethren completely dissipated. Everyone's smiles were also a little cruel. Vice President Robert, that's the restaurant over there. Luther and Robert were walking side by side as they pointed at Amy's. He had volunteered to lead the way for Robert, but a surprised look appeared on his face at the sight of the long line in front of the restaurant. The restaurant hasn't even opened yet, and there are already so many people lining up. Robert was also quite surprised to see this. It was very rare to see such a scene in the Aden Square. Only when a restaurant was holding a promotion or event would there be a long line in front of the restaurant. Even the restaurants at the top of the Aden Square food rankings would only have people lining up during the peak hours of the night. Vice President, I think this restaurant must have hired someone. They must have guessed that we're going to verify their authenticity, so they've arranged for so many people to line up. Look, those people aren't even saying anything. Luther was a little angry. He didn't think that Meg would have made such thorough preparations. However, there was a limit to everything, and this abnormal situation was even more suspicious. That's not necessarily true. Robert shook his head and quickened his pace toward the long line. He walked over to Brandley and bowed slightly as he said, "Master Brandley, do you always come here for lunch?" "Oh, it's Robert." Brandley turned around to look at Robert, and was also a little surprised. He nodded with a smile, and said, "That's right. I heard that Mr. Mac is releasing a new dish. If I'm late, I won't be able to eat it." The person that the vice president treats with such respect is actually also in the team. A hint of surprise appeared on Luther's face upon seeing this. He didn't know who Brandley was, but he could tell from the Grey Temple insignia on his robe that he was most likely a member of the Grey Temple. In the beginning, Robert had also thought that the restaurant had rigged the voting system, but he still wanted to verify it in person. To his surprise, there was a long line in front of the restaurant, and Brandley was also in the line. One had to realize that Brandley was a highly revered magic caster in the Grey Temple, and there was no way that he would stoop so low as to be a prop for a restaurant. Judging from the attire and disposition of the people in the line, most of them didn't lack money. No restaurant's promotional event could pique their interest, so Robert couldn't help but ask, "Is the food in this restaurant really that good?" "You'll know once you try it. If you want to line up, then hurry up. You'll regret it if you don't get to eat it." Brandley shook his head with a mysterious smile. "I trust your taste buds." Robert nodded with a smile before making his way to the back of the line. Master Robert is also lining up. The surprise on Luther's face became even more pronounced. He quickly made his way over to Robert and whispered, "Vice President." Robert interrupted Luther's words with a serious expression and said, "Then line up behind me, Luther. Whether or not it's worth this price and can really be liked by everyone, we'll have to try it before we can judge." "All right." Luther swallowed the rest of his words and stood behind Robert. The reason why he respected the vice president was because of his serious attitude. Looks like this restaurant owner knows a lot of people of high status. Otherwise, he would have been able to invite someone from the Grey Temple to support him, Luther thought to himself. He still didn't believe that Meg's expensive food would be able to attract so many people to line up. "Little brother, why are we splitting into two teams?" Robert and the young man in front of him asked curiously. Normally, there would only be one line in the line, but there were two long lines in front of the restaurant. Furthermore, both sides seemed to be hostile toward each other, and the atmosphere was rather tense and oppressive. "I can tell that this is your first time here, right? Let me tell you, this line is very particular. Amy's has a delicacy called tofu pudding. It has two flavors, sweet and savory. Even though it sounds like the same dish, the two flavors are actually two different dishes. The savory tofu pudding is unforgettable, and as for the sweet tofu pudding, it's so sweet that it's greasy. You guys made the right choice by choosing the savory tofu pudding line," Jamie said with a smile. As a veteran savory tofu pudding supporter, he had the responsibility and obligation to inject new blood into the savory party. Savory tofu pudding is simply inedible. It's so salty that you'll definitely want to cough after eating it. However, sweet tofu pudding is different. It's sweet and refreshing. It's sweet but not greasy. It's simply a delicacy. The little old man standing at the back of the line was a little indignant. He looked at Robert with a smile, and said, "Joining the sweet party is the best choice you've made. I'm warning you guys, you better stop your shameless behavior of giving 1 star to savory tofu pudding. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. You guys started the war, so the sweet party won't be afraid." The conversation between the two of them successfully ignited a war between the sweet and savory parties, and the two sides instantly descended into a war of words again. What kind of delicacy must it be to give the customers such a sense of honor? Robert's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this. He was also looking forward to the so-called delicacy that everyone was talking about. Perhaps he could try both of them. What? Robert was instantly dumbstruck upon seeing this. He had never seen customers arguing over different tastes in a restaurant. Furthermore, it looked like a fight was about to break out. Chapter 274. As soon as he said that, the noisy crowd at the entrance fell into silence again. Everyone's eyes fell on the two of them. Although everyone was arguing, it wasn't that they weren't angry. However, since the boss at the front of the line didn't make a move, and the people at the back of the line didn't make a move either, the situation was still under control. However, judging from the attitude of this couple, were they going to fight over whether to eat the sweet or salty tofu pudding? If it was more serious, wouldn't they have to go their separate ways? However, this couple really looked like Beauty and the Beast. Although the difference in height was cute, the petite girl looked especially small when standing in front of the bear-like man. One of his arms was as thick as her leg. How can that be? 1111, I really love you. But you know that I don't like sweet things, so I chose the salty tofu pudding. Lulu shook her head and said with a smile, "Liar, if you love me, why can't you love my taste? You know that I like sweet things the most." 1111 shook her head and looked even more sad. "That's right, girl. This kind of man who doesn't know how to be considerate of women doesn't deserve to stay. Let's just forget about it." The old man at the front of the line echoed, "That's right. Can there be any good people in the salty party? Look at how he defended himself. He doesn't have any sincerity at all. That's right. A man who only knows how to reason with women is destined to be single for the rest of his life. He wins the fight for face, but loses the fight for wife." The people in the sweet party all agreed. They weren't afraid of making a big deal out of it. "Young man, don't worry. There is no lack of women in this world. We don't need this kind of woman who likes to eat sweet things. That's right. Salty is light. Salty is faith. How can you abandon your faith for a woman? That's right. As long as you stay, I'll introduce my granddaughter to you." The people in the salty party also started to give tit for tat and tried to persuade him. The malice from the single people was magnified infinitely at this moment. Anyway, those who were here to watch the show would never mind making a big deal out of it. Everyone looked at the two of them, waiting to see how they would choose. The man looked tall and strong. He definitely wouldn't give in to a woman in front of so many people. That would be too embarrassing. Under everyone's gaze, Lulu still had only one person in his eyes. He took a step forward and gently placed his hand on her head. He said in a pampering tone, "Silly girl, no matter what you like to eat, of course I can accept it. If you want me to eat something sweet, then I'll line up at the end and eat something sweet with you. TTSTTTTTSTs SSSSSSS." The expressions of the people who were encouraging them to break up suddenly froze. They were caught off guard and stuffed with a mouthful of dog food. They didn't even have time to refuse. A young man looked at Lulu's back as she walked to the end of the line. He sounded jealous. "Ah, I'm so envious of this kind of love. You can only throw tantrums and be willful when you're married to love," a young girl said enviously. 1111 looked at Lulu's back. She walked out of the line and followed him with a smile on her face. Why aren't you at the front of the line? What if all the good food is finished?" Lulu turned around after he walked to the end of the line. He was surprised to see 1111 standing in front of him. It's okay. Everything I eat with you is delicious. 1111 shook her head, looked up at him, and said with a smile. The people around them had strange expressions. Okay, then stand in front of me. Lulu's face was full of smiles. He stood back and let 1111 stand in front of him. Lulu, when did you fall in love with me? 1111 looked back at Lulu after standing for a while. She was full of curiosity. I'm not sure. Lulu shook his head and said with a smile, when I woke up one day and found that everyone around you, regardless of gender, was my rival in love. I knew then that I was hopeless. Hihi, that's great. 1111's face was full of smiles. Hiss. The people around them all stepped back. The cold dog food was slapped on their faces. How could they live? Fortunately, the restaurant had just opened, and everyone's footsteps unconsciously quickened as they entered the restaurant. Let's go. We can go in now. I wonder if we still have seats. Lulu smiled and held 1111's hand as they walked forward. Robert followed the group into the restaurant. His eyes lit up when he saw the decorations. The size of the restaurant was not big compared to the hundreds of tables in large restaurants. However, the 16 tables were arranged neatly, and could accommodate 48 customers at the same time without feeling crowded. Of course, what made his eyes light up even more was the style of the restaurant. The 16 wooden tables and chairs had similar patterns and appeared to be very harmonious. The murals on the 4 walls also looked majestic and contained everything. The 4 crystal chandeliers were even more luxurious. He had visited all of the restaurants in the Aden Square, and this one was definitely ranked number 1 in terms of comfort. It wasn't the ostentatious kind of luxurious, but rather, it was the kind of ambience that was hidden beneath the surface. Just this kind of ambience was already far beyond that of ordinary restaurants, and it was definitely worth giving this restaurant 5 points for its dining environment. Yarbemia stepped forward with a smile, and said, Welcome. I'm sorry, but there are no seats in the restaurant right now. If you want to buy Ruggiamo, you can order it now. You'll have to wait for a while for other dishes. I'll wait for a while. Robert looked at the warm smile on Yarbemia's face, and a hint of a smile appeared on his face. Okay. Yarbemia nodded, and then continued to talk to the customers behind him. 5 points for this kind of service is not a problem. Robert nodded thoughtfully. This waiter was not very enthusiastic, but the appropriate distance and the warm smile made him feel a lot better. It was very good service. Now, all that's left is the taste. To be able to arouse such a strong response from the customers, this restaurant might really become a dark horse in this competition. Robert looked toward the kitchen expectantly. A faint, alluring aroma wafted through the air. Is Little Boss eating the new dish? Everyone's attention was drawn to Amy, who was sitting at a table in front of the counter. There was a bowl of braised chicken in front of her, and a bowl of moonlight rice in front of her. Chapter 275. Almost all of the customers in the restaurant had their eyes fixed on Amy and the braised chicken in front of her. The alluring aroma of chicken soup wafted through the air, and they couldn't help but crane their necks to see just what kind of delicacy could give off such an alluring aroma. I'm going to start eating. Amy picked up a piece of golden chicken with her chopsticks and took a bite. As she chewed on the fragrant chicken, a drop of golden red chicken soup dripped onto her lips, and she swallowed it after chewing a few times. She then licked her lips with her adorable little tongue, and a joyful expression appeared on her face. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed instantly rang out in the restaurant. It's delicious. Amy nodded with a sincere expression on her little face. She finished the remaining half of the chicken before putting a piece of shiitake mushroom into her mouth. She then ladled a few spoonfuls of chicken soup over her rice before putting a spoonful of rice into her mouth. She chewed happily, and the more she ate, the more delicious the food became. Even her body was swaying uncontrollably from side to side. Ah, I want to eat. How can Little Boss eat so well and look so good? I can't take it anymore, I'm starving. Boss, I want a braised chicken and rice. I only brought 8 gold coins, so I won't be able to eat tofu pudding today. I want a braised chicken and rice as well. All of the customers were instantly filled with awe and admiration. The customers who had been hesitant at the sight of the 800 copper coins per serving immediately began to place their orders. They were all looking forward to seeing how delicious Amy's braised chicken and rice would be. What a brilliant marketing strategy! Many of the customers probably won't be able to resist the temptation of letting this little girl eat a braised chicken and rice dish in front of everyone. Robert looked at Meg in the kitchen with admiration in his eyes. This was countless times better than standing at the entrance of the restaurant and yelling out loud. He looked at Amy and couldn't help but gulp as he thought to himself, how about I also get a braised chicken and rice dish? It definitely won't be that good. She's definitely faking it. She's definitely faking it, Luther thought to himself, but he couldn't look away from Amy and the braised chicken and rice dish. 1111's eyes lit up at the sight of Amy, and she turned to Lulu with an expectant look in her eyes. Wow, what an adorable little girl. Let's have many babies in the future, Lulu. All right, you'll be in charge of giving birth, and I'll be in charge of raising them. I'll let them spoil you when they grow up. Lulu nodded with a smile, but there was a trace of heartache in the depths of his eyes. Okay, I love children the most. Then when we can stop, we must have a lot of babies. 1111's SSSS. She looked at Amy's to herself, and she was of them. Lulu looked at the half-eaten scallion pancake in one hand and the other hand. She then looked at 1111, who was trying to make herself look even more pitiful. Lulu nodded with a hint of exasperation in her eyes. Lulu, you're the best. 1111 looked at Lulu with a touched expression. Lulu turned to Yarbemia, who had just walked up to her, and asked, "Can I buy that little girl's food?" "I'm sorry, but you can only order the braised chicken when there's a seat available." "You can order it after you're seated," Yarbemia said with a smile as she shook her head. 1111 looked at Yarbemia with a sincere expression, and said, "All right, thank you. Please leave a copy for us." "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll be able to order it." Yarbemia smiled. Even though many customers had ordered the braised chicken under Amy's persuasion, there were still a large number of customers who didn't order it. Not every customer was wealthy enough to order a braised chicken and rice that cost 800 copper coins. Most of them had to save up for a few days before making up their minds to order a tofu pudding or a rugiamo. Sure. 1111 nodded with a smile on her face again. Yarbemia walked over to the next customer with a smile. She was a little envious of the love between this couple, but that kind of thing probably won't happen to me, right? Yarbemia thought to herself as she shook her head to get rid of these messy thoughts. She continued to serve the customers efficiently. More and more delicacies were brought out of the kitchen, and the alluring aroma wafted through the restaurant. Even though they were all different types of food, the aroma was very distinct, and the customers in the line were getting hungrier and hungrier. Even though there was a lot of noise outside, the customers seemed to have a tacit understanding after entering the restaurant. Everyone is quietly enjoying the food, and the occasional sound is mostly of praise. This atmosphere is indeed very comfortable, Robert thought as he looked at the customers in the restaurant. Robert thought to himself as he observed the customers in the restaurant. His gaze landed on Harrison, who was enjoying his rugiamo so much that the fat on his body was jiggling uncontrollably. He nodded slightly. And the food should be very delicious. The pleasure of enjoying food is uncontrollable, and it's not easy to fake. The fact that all the customers are satisfied with the taste of the food shows how amazing it is. Such a restaurant can sell breakfast for more than 300 people in one morning. With the unit price of each dish, they can get a turnover of 150,000 yuan. Now, it seems to be a matter of course. Robert already had a rough idea in his mind. Perhaps this restaurant would completely change the structure of the Aden cuisine rankings. It's fake, it's fake. Luther tried to hypnotize himself as he stared at the rugiamo in the hands of a customer. Swallowing had become a habitual action, and he couldn't control himself at all. The first batch of customers left one after another. They knew that Mr. Mac's business was good, but there were too few seats. Therefore, the customers all consciously focused on enjoying the food during the meal, paid the bill, and left, leaving the customers who were tortured by the temptation of the food behind them to sit down and enjoy the food. After sitting down, Robert picked up the menu on the table. The cowhide cover was very comfortable to the touch. It was hard to imagine that someone would use such a fine piece of cowhide as the cover of a menu, and there was one on every table. The style was perfectly reflected in the details. After looking at the menu for a while, Robert flipped it over and handed it to Luther, who was sitting in the middle of the table. "Luther, take a look and see what you want to eat. Come with me today, and I'll pay the bill." "How can I do that, Vice President?" Luther hurriedly waved his hand, but he didn't dare to rush to pay the bill. After all, as a low-level worker in the Food Association, his monthly salary was only 4,000 copper coins. A portion of braised chicken would cost him 1/5 of his salary. He really couldn't afford it. "How do you know if it's really good if you don't try it?" "We have to work with a serious attitude," Robert said earnestly. He could see that Luther still didn't believe in this restaurant. Luther looked at the menu for a while and hesitated, then pointed at the Ruggiamo and said, "Then, I'll have a Ruggiamo. Here's a notice. The first book group, 145,658,434, is full, so Whisper has opened a second group. Those who haven't joined can join the second group, 453,615,125. Amy, if you're in the first group, don't join the second group. I'm so poor that I can only open 1,000 groups." Chapter 276. I'll have a braised chicken, or a sweet tofu pudding. That Ruggiamo is the one with the meat in it, right? I'll have one too. That Yangju fried rice is the one with the rainbow in it, right? I'll have one too. 1111 flipped through the menu and ordered happily. After ordering everything, she put down the menu and looked at Lulu, who was sitting across from her, and asked, "Lulu, what do you want to eat?" "I'll have your leftovers." Lulu shook her head with a smile. She closed the menu and looked at Yabemia. "That's all." "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabemia nodded with a smile and walked to the next customer. A braised chicken and rice, a Ruggiamo, a sweet tofu pudding, and a savory tofu pudding. Robert closed the menu and looked at Yabemia. Yabemia shook his head slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. There's only one tofu pudding per person. My friend and I will each have one." Robert pointed at Luther and said, "Vice, I don't need tofu pudding, really." Luther hurriedly waved his hand. However, when he heard Robert refer to him as a friend, it seemed that he didn't want to reveal his identity, so he swallowed back the words president. "Since we're here, of course we have to try this mesmerizing tofu pudding. That's all." Robert smiled as he looked at Yabemia. "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabemia nodded with a smile and turned to walk into the kitchen. "There's a couple who are so sweet today. They talk like they're giving out candy," Yabemia said with a smile as he walked into the kitchen. Sally happened to be washing dishes as well. "They're giving out dog food in broad daylight." Meg also turned to look at the dining room when he heard that. He just so happened to see a burly man carefully brushing the bangs of his girlfriend's hair. His affectionate gaze was enviable, and he also had the urge to kick the dog food over. Sally also turned to look, and her eyes lit up. However, her expression was still cold and calm. "Feed her dog food? What's that, boss?" Yabemia asked with a perplexed expression as she picked up 2 bowls of braised chicken. "This." Meg opened his mouth. There was no such thing as a single dog in this world, so it was a bit difficult to explain the concept of dog food. After thinking for a while, he explained, "It's the behavior of those who are in love and forced to show their affection in front of those who don't have a partner. It's called dog food. This is my hometown's slang." "I see." Yabemia nodded thoughtfully, then asked curiously, "But boss, do people in your hometown call themselves dogs?" "This." Meg was stumped again. The term single dog wasn't insulting. It was usually self-deprecating, but the term dog sounded a little strange, so Meg smiled wittily and said, "Serve the dishes to the guests first." "Okay." Yabemia immediately quickened his pace and walked out of the kitchen. When Meg retracted his gaze, He happened to glance at Luther. He had an excellent memory, so he immediately recognized him as the worker from the Food Association who came to promote the tickets for the Aden Square food competition the other day. The man sitting opposite him was dressed in an exquisite suit. Judging from Luther's attitude, it was very likely that he was one of the higher-ups in the Food Association. What are they doing here? Are they suspecting that I'm cheating? Meg's brows furrowed slightly as he pondered the reason for their visit. However, on second thought, Mag turned back to continue cooking with a nonchalant expression. Anyone with a discerning eye would be able to tell the difference between real and fake with a single glance. If someone was still looking for trouble after tasting his dish, then that meant that someone was trying to make things difficult for him. One dish after another was brought out by Yarbemia from the kitchen, and delivered to each and every customer with precise precision. Sally was also very efficient at tidying up the table. She casually cast a water magic spell, and the greasy table was instantly cleaned up without any water stains. A restaurant with only 3 people can operate so efficiently. This owner has a very good eye for waitresses, Robert couldn't help but exclaim. Robert couldn't help but praise. He looked at Mag, who was operating several kitchenware in the kitchen at once, and he was even more expectant of the dishes that were about to be served. Your braised chicken and rice, rugiamo, and sweet and savory tofu pudding, Yarbemia said with a smile as she walked over with a tray and placed down the dishes. Thank you. Robert nodded slightly, but his eyes were already drawn to the dishes in front of him. Even though he had already seen the other customers eat a lot, when the dishes were placed in front of him, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. The rich aroma of the chicken soup was enhanced to the extreme by another unknown aroma. The 2 bowls of white and tender things were most likely the sweet tofu pudding and the savory tofu pudding. The faint fragrance of tofu pudding wafted into his nose. The rugiamo in the brown paper bag also had a very special aroma. He wondered what kind of cooking method was used to create such a delicious dish. Luther, do you want the sweet tofu pudding or the savory tofu pudding? Robert asked. You can choose first, Master. I'm fine with either. Seeing as Robert had already made the decision, Luther didn't continue to argue. However, he still smiled. All right, then I'll choose the savory tofu pudding. Robert smiled as he picked up the bowl of tofu pudding with orange sauce, pickled mustard, garlic, and chopped green onions. He preferred the savory tofu pudding to the sweet tofu pudding. Luther's eyes were completely drawn to the rugiamo in front of him. The aroma of the braised meat wafted into his nose. This was a wonderful taste that he had never tasted before. He didn't dare to say that he had eaten at all of the restaurants in the Aden Square, but he had at least visited all of them. However, he had never seen a restaurant that could arouse such a strong appetite. His stomach was already rumbling when he saw the other customers enjoying the food in front of him. Now, it was getting even more restless. I think, maybe it's not that good. Luther held on to his last bit of stubbornness. Then, he picked up the rugiamo with his hands and took a bite. There were 2 layers of soft and fragrant baiji bread sandwiched between the tender braised meat. He bit into it, and delicious gravy flowed out. Every single taste bud on the tip of his tongue seemed to be in ecstasy. In that instant, Luther felt as if his life had been elevated to a higher level. He had fallen into a trap of endless delicious braised meat, and the delicious taste danced on the tip of his tongue. This is a delicacy that should never exist in this world. What kind of superb cooking skills does he have to be able to cook such delicious food? This is light. A light that illuminates the entire Aden Square. Such delicious food should be number 1 on the Aden Square food rankings board. Luther roared in his heart. 300 copper coins for a small rugiamo. Is it worth it? It is. Chapter 277. Gulp. Luther's throat moved as he swallowed the rugiamo. The delicious taste of meat filled his mouth, and after swallowing, it transformed into a violent warm current that flowed through his bloodstream. His blood was flowing at an accelerated rate, and he felt as if he had been rejuvenated. Ah! Luther couldn't help but let out a satisfied sigh. The deliciousness was already at the pinnacle, but he didn't expect it to bring such a special and comfortable enjoyment to his body. He had never eaten such delicious and special food in his life. "Look at you, it must be delicious, right?" Robert, who was picking up a piece of chicken, asked Luther, whose expression was a little exaggerated. At first, he was very certain that the restaurant was cheating, but now, he looked like he had completely fallen for it. The contrast was a little comical. Yes. Luther nodded. His mouth was stuffed with Ruggiamo, and he couldn't stop eating. "In that case, let me try this braised chicken and rice as well. Let me see what's so special about it." Robert put the piece of chicken into his mouth, and took a light bite. The fragrant chicken melted in his mouth along with the thick chicken broth. The extremely delicious chicken broth and the refreshing chicken had completely overturned his understanding of braised chicken. Robert had been transferred to the Food Association from the City Lord's castle, so he had an extremely high standard for food. He had eaten at all of the restaurants in the Aden Square in his early years, and was a frequent customer of many of them. Even though this chicken is a turkey, it's a little different from normal turkey. The chicken is a little tighter, but it doesn't feel like it's too old. The heat is just right, and the chicken broth ensures that it's tender and fragrant. The chicken broth is also extremely delicious. I've never tasted such delicious chicken broth before. It's rich, but not greasy. It's definitely a top-grade delicacy. Robert's eyes completely lit up as he appraised the dish. You don't know this, but the braised chicken and rice isn't just delicious, the shiitake mushrooms are also extremely precious. The reason why the chicken broth has such an unparalleled flavor is because of the shiitake mushrooms, which can be sold for 100 gold coins each, and Mr. Mac put a total of 4 shiitake mushrooms in this bowl. Jimmy, who was sitting at the same table as them, chimed in with a smile on his face as he brought up the things that he had learned from Carl that morning. Mushroom. Robert looked into the bowl curiously before picking up a piece of shiitake mushroom. It was a type of mushroom that he had never seen before, and a unique aroma wafted through the air. The unique aroma of the braised chicken came from this mushroom, and it left a deep impression on him. Shiitake mushrooms that cost 100 gold coins? Robert put the shiitake mushroom into his mouth with some suspicion. He took a light bite, and the chicken broth that had been absorbed immediately overflowed. The ultimate freshness was best explained by the combination of the two fragrances. This taste is better than thousands of seasonings. No mushroom can have such a delicious taste. It's enough to be called the king of mushrooms, Robert exclaimed in admiration. He had never heard of such a delicious taste before. From this, it could be seen how precious these shiitake mushrooms were. 100 gold coins for one was not an exaggeration. Imitating Amy's previous method, Robert also poured a few spoonfuls of chicken soup over the rice. Then, he scooped a spoonful of rice that had been dyed golden red and put it into his mouth. As he chewed, the delicious chicken soup and sweet rice blended together perfectly. He swallowed it in one gulp and couldn't help but put another spoonful into his mouth. The taste was so delicious that he couldn't stop. 800 copper coins? Why do I feel like that price is too low? Robert thought to himself as he felt a warm current flowing through his stomach. All of his doubts about the price had completely disappeared after tasting such delicious food. In fact, he even felt that it was reasonable for the price to be a little more expensive. After all, these were shiitake mushrooms that cost 100 gold coins. It's delicious. It's so delicious, Luther exclaimed as he put down the bag in his hand. His face was a little flushed from the rush of blood, and he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Robert was no longer in the mood to talk to him. He was stuffing mouthful after mouthful of braised chicken and rice into his mouth with a joyful expression on his face. Luther didn't say anything else. He picked up the tofu pudding and took a bite. He was instantly immersed in the delicious tofu pudding. The sweet flavor enveloped his entire body, and he was intoxicated. He had never thought that sugar could be so delicious. Give me another bowl of rice. Robert had unknowingly finished a bowl of rice, and there was still more than half of the braised chicken left. He turned to Yarbemia. Sure, one more bowl of rice. Yarbemia nodded. He was looking at Sally when he said the latter half of his sentence. Sally glanced at Robert and Luther, and nodded slightly to indicate that she would remember. She didn't want to make the same mistake as she did in the morning again. The two who had come with suspicions and wanted to expose Amy's fraud had completely forgotten their original intentions. They were completely intoxicated by the delicious food and couldn't extricate themselves. In that case, there shouldn't be any problems, right? Meg smiled as he looked at Robert and Luther's expressions of enjoyment. He felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. Then his eyes fell on the girl in a black veil sitting alone in the corner. As long as the restaurant was open, she would come early to line up, and then quietly sit in the corner and eat a bowl of tofu pudding and a bowl of Yangju fried rice. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of person was behind the veil. However, although the girl wore a veil that covered her entire head every day, he could see that the color and style of her clothes were becoming fresher and brighter. Meg felt that this was a good change and direction. Gloria suddenly felt as if someone was looking at her. She raised her head subconsciously. Her gaze passed through the crowd in the restaurant, and met Meg's eyes through the veil. "He's looking at me." Gloria suddenly felt her heartbeat quicken. She felt an inexplicable sense of nervousness, but she quickly denied her own thoughts. Maybe he's just looking over here casually. There are so many customers, and he definitely won't look at someone who doesn't even dare to show her face. Meg withdrew his gaze and continued to cook. To him, many of the customers were very interesting. After all, it was the first time he had seen many races, so he didn't pay too much attention to them. "He shouldn't be looking at me." Gloria heaved a sigh of relief, but for some reason, she felt a little disappointed. She lowered her head and continued to eat her tofu pudding. Chapter 278. Haha, what a cute little elf. She's calling me big sister. 1111 looked at Amy happily before shaking her head, and saying, "No, I'm not an elf, nor a flower fairy. However, I might have been an elf 100 years ago." Lulu sat across from them and looked at 1111 and Amy with a doting smile. 100 years ago? Wow, big sister is already over 100 years old. Amy looked at 1111 in shock. "But you look so young and beautiful." "Really? No one has praised me like that for a long time. I thought I was already old." 1111 smiled as she stroked Amy's hair, and said, "Little cutie, you have such a sweet mouth. What's your name?" "My name is Amy, and this is Ugly Duckling." Amy didn't resist 1111's touch. Instead, she felt that it was very warm and gentle, and she introduced Ugly Duckling as well. "Amy, what a nice name. It's as cute as you. You can call me Big Sister 1111. However, this little guy looks like a kitten. Why do you call it Ugly Duckling?" 1111 asked Amy curiously. "Because it hatched from a duck egg, so it must be a duckling. However, it's too ugly, so I called it Ugly Duckling. However, although it's ugly now, it'll grow up and become a swan in spring. When that time comes." "When that time comes," Amy explained seriously. However, she looked down at Ugly Duckling with a fervent look in her eyes toward the end. Her expression was similar to when she was looking at the delicious food in front of her. Meow, meow. Tilda Ugly Duckling was a little flustered for some reason. It felt that Amy's smile and gaze were hiding a great secret. "What a cute little guy. Can I hug it?" 1111 looked at Amy with a smile. "Ugly Duckling?" Amy looked up and asked. "No, you're cuter than it is. I want to hold little Amy." 1111 shook her head and looked at Amy lovingly. All right, I'll let you hug me." Amy hesitated for 3 seconds. Looking at 1111, she quickly chose to nod. This young lady looked so gentle and kind. Amy really wanted to be hugged by her. "Then I'll hug you." 1111 gently picked up Amy, who was still holding Ugly Duckling in her arms, and placed her on her lap. She stroked Ugly Duckling's head with an envious expression, and said, "This little thing is also very cute. I'm so envious of Boss for having such a cute daughter." Ugly Duckling, which had always been cold and aloof to everyone, wasn't angry at all when 1111 rubbed its head. Instead, a look of enjoyment appeared on its face, and it even took the initiative to rub its little head against her hand. "I think you should be envious of me. I have a super handsome father who can cook super delicious food. There's no one better than him in this world," Amy said with a serious expression. 1111 nodded with an envious expression, and said, "Haha, you're right. I'm super envious of you. You can sit in a restaurant and eat delicious food every day when you wake up in bed. You must be super happy." Lulu couldn't help but clench her fists upon hearing 1111's words. She looked at 1111 holding Amy in her arms and chatting happily with the two little ones in a soft voice. Her heart ached for them, but she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth, and continued to look on in silence. "Here's your braised chicken and rice." At this moment, Yabemia walked over with a plate of braised chicken and rice, and placed it gently in front of 1111. She looked at Amy in 1111's arms with a surprised expression. Amy wasn't clingy to anyone other than Meg. Amy obediently got down from 1111's lap, and looked at 1111 with an earnest expression as she recommended the braised chicken and rice. "Big sister 1111, you should eat first. This braised chicken and rice is super delicious." "Yay, it's super delicious. And there's even a little moon in the rice. It's so cute." 1111's eyes lit up as she looked at the braised chicken in her bowl and the rice in front of her. It was as if she had seen something incredible, but she still didn't forget to thank Yabemia. "Lulu, you should eat too," 1111 said to Lulu. "It's fine, I want to watch you eat. I'll eat the rest after you're done." Lulu's eyes were filled with gentleness as she shook her head. "Lulu. Big Bear, why do you have such a cute name?" Amy looked at Lulu with a perplexed expression. "Haha, Big Bear, this nickname is so cute. Little Amy, you're the best." 1111 smiled happily. She picked up a piece of chicken from the bowl and handed it to Lulu. "Have a piece first, Lulu," she said seriously. "If it's too good, you won't have anything to eat. You won't be able to eat that much." Lulu looked at the big bowl of braised chicken with a smile. She opened her mouth and took the piece of chicken. She chewed it a few times, and her eyes lit up. The delicious taste spread in her mouth. This was something she had never tasted before. Because 1111 loved to eat, they had traveled to many places over the past 100 years. Every time they arrived at a place, they would stop and eat all the delicious food there before continuing on their journey. Because of this, they were often chased or ambushed. However, 1111 loved to eat, so there was nothing they could do. However, despite having eaten so many delicacies from so many places, he had never tasted such a strong delicacy. The fragrant and tender mussels and the delicious chicken soup were on a completely different level from the so-called delicacies he had eaten in the past. It was a taste that made him want to praise. "Lulu, is it really that good?" 1111 asked as she looked at Lulu with anticipation in her eyes. After all, Lulu had always been expressionless when he was eating, but now, his expression was completely lit up, and there was a look of enjoyment on his face that had never appeared before. "Yes, it's very good. Hurry up and eat." Lulu nodded with a smile and moved the bowl a little closer to 1111. "Lulu, why don't you eat with us?" 1111 looked up at Lulu and said with a smile. "You eat first. I'll watch you eat." Lulu shook her head and reached out to touch 1111's head lovingly. "Eat. You'll like it. Then I'll dig in." 1111 looked at the braised chicken in front of her, and her eyes lit up. She picked up a piece of chicken and put it into her mouth. The tender and delicious chicken tasted amazing. They often ate turkey in the mountains, but she had never thought that it could be so delicious. It completely overturned her impression of turkey. Then she picked up a piece of shiitake mushroom and bit into it gently. The delicious chicken soup instantly filled her mouth. The extremely delicious taste was intoxicating. Then she poured the chicken soup into the rice and put it into her mouth. The delicious chicken soup blended with the sweet moonlight rice. Chicken, shiitake mushroom, side dishes, and a big spoon of secret sauce. It was so delicious that she couldn't stop eating. "It's so delicious. I think I can eat 10 more bowls." 1111 looked at the rice that she had unknowingly finished and looked at Lulu excitedly. Chapter 279. Sure. Yabemia nodded, but she was still a little hesitant as she asked, "It's just 10 bowls of rice. Are you sure you want that much? You still have a lot of dishes to serve." Lulu thought for a moment before nodding, and said, "Then we'll have 4 bowls of rice and a portion of braised chicken and rice. We'll add more if it's not enough." "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabemia nodded as she turned and walked toward the kitchen. "It's really delicious, little Amy. I'm so envious of you for having such a great cook as your father. This is the most delicious food I've ever had." 1111's expression became even more radiant after eating a bowl of rice and half a portion of braised chicken and rice, and she looked at Amy with an excited expression. She had tried all kinds of delicious food, but she was still captivated by this braised chicken and rice. Compared to this, all the so-called delicious food she had eaten in the past was inferior to this dish. There was no comparison at all. "That's right, Father's cooking is the best in the world." Amy's little face was filled with pride. She was even happier when someone praised Meg than when they praised her. 1111 still wanted to say something, but her expression suddenly froze, and she looked down at her lower abdomen in disbelief. She had felt a warm sensation in her lower abdomen when she was eating, and she had thought that it was just a normal reaction after eating the turkey. However, this warm sensation was becoming clearer and clearer, and it seemed to be healing the injuries she had sustained all those years ago. 1111 formed a heart shape with her palms and gently placed them over her lower abdomen. She murmured a few gentle yet cryptic incantations, and a faint green light lit up from the heart shape, covering her lower abdomen. A withered little sapling about 10 centimeters tall slowly grew out of the heart shape. The branches and leaves were all withered, as if they were dead. However, the smallest leaf at the very top of the sapling now had a hint of tender green. Even though it was only half a leaf, it was still very conspicuous on such a withered little sapling. Is the world tree alive?" 1111 looked at the hint of tender green on the little sapling, and her expression was filled with shock and joy. Tears even welled up in the corners of her eyes. She looked at the little sapling between her hands as if she was looking at a child that she hadn't seen in a long time. It's really alive." Lulu abruptly rose to his feet. His hands trembled with excitement as he looked at the patch of green on the withered little tree between 1111's hands. He walked up to 1111 and squatted down to look at the patch of green on the little tree. Both of them were overjoyed. "Lulu." 1111 looked at Lulu, and she couldn't stop crying, and tears flowed down her face. "That's a good thing. With the world tree, we can revive the druids. You can also conceive again. As long as we're still around, we can have many babies and recreate this race." Lulu reached out and hugged 1111. He patted her back gently and allowed her to bury her face in his chest. His clothes were wet with her tears. "Cry. You'll be fine after you cry," Lulu whispered into 1111's ear. 100 years ago, they had experienced the extinction of their race. They carried the seed of the world tree with them, and relied on each other to survive. They had been hunted down on the Norland continent for close to 100 years, and had been in dire straits many times. 30 years ago, 1111 was already pregnant, and they found a place to rest beside a lake in the mountains. They wanted to peacefully wait for the birth of a new life, but those detestable bastards suddenly appeared. 1111, who was pregnant, was no longer agile. Although they broke out of the encirclement in the end, 1111, who was shot in the stomach by a poisonous arrow, couldn't save the baby, and was severely injured. The world tree, which had just grown into a little sapling, injected all its source of life into 1111's body, and saved 1111 from the brink of death. However, the world tree, which was the hope of the food tribe, withered. They had tried countless ways to revive it in the past few decades. They even risked a high price to buy a portion of the spring of life, but it still didn't show any signs of recovery. And because of this injury, 1111 also lost her fertility. A girl who loved children so much, but lost the possibility of being a mother. How cruel was that? Although Lulu had been taking care of her carefully for the past few decades, he still felt very sorry for her every time he saw her looking at other people's children in a daze and playing with them happily like a mother. However, the world tree was showing signs of revival now. Once the world tree was revived, it could provide 1111 with an endless supply of energy and recovery ability. The loss of fertility and the side effects that would flare up every once in a while would no longer be a problem. Hope and light fell on the two of them again. They seemed to have found their destination after running around aimlessly for 100 years in order to survive. He could understand 1111's feelings the most because the same feelings were surging in his heart. However, he was a man, and should be her support at a time like this. Amy stood at the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked at the two of them, who suddenly hugged each other and cried with a puzzled look on her face. However, she didn't rush to ask any questions after seeing the atmosphere. She just stood quietly at the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Meanwhile, the customers at the side were also dumbfounded when they saw the two of them crying tears of joy. They didn't know why the girl suddenly cried. Wasn't she very happy when she was eating just now? Could it be that she cried because of the delicious food? Looks like this girl has a very high place in her heart when it comes to food, a customer at the side guessed softly. A middle-aged man at the side wiped the corners of his eyes and sighed with emotion. Yes, I didn't think so at first, but seeing this girl cry, I think that almost half of my life has passed, and I've only just tasted Mr. Mac's food. It's such a sad thing. I can't help but cry. Father, don't be sad. You're already so old, it's embarrassing. His son, who was around 17 or 18 years old, silently picked up his bowl and turned his face away with a disdainful expression. The middle-aged man slammed his chopsticks onto the table with an enraged expression, and said, "You little brat, how dare you call me an embarrassment? Are you too arrogant, or am I too weak to hold a whip? I was wrong. Eat your food, and we can talk outside. I don't want to be blacklisted by the restaurant just because you whipped me." The son immediately gave in. That's more like it. The middle-aged man also took a glance at Amy, who wasn't paying any attention to them, before picking up his chopsticks again and nodding before continuing to eat his braised chicken. 1111 didn't bawl her eyes out. She was only sobbing slightly, and she was being held gently in Lulu's arms, so it didn't affect the customers at all. They all looked at each other before continuing to eat. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.